She grabbed the microphone from the stage host's hand, pointed straight at the janitor, standing beside a $200,000 grand piano, and laughed into the speakers loud enough for 300 people to hear. "Play this piano perfectly, and I'll marry you." The ballroom erupted, but Elijah Carter did not walk away. He pulled off his cleaning gloves slowly, finger by finger, and sat down at that piano like he'd been waiting his whole life for this exact moment. What happened next silenced every billionaire in that room, and nobody, not one person, saw it coming. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. If this hits you, subscribe and follow the channel. You won't want to miss what comes next. The gala had been running for 2 hours before anyone noticed Elijah Carter was even in the room. That was by design. Event staff at the Ashford Grand, the most exclusive private venue in Manhattan, were trained to move like shadows. You cleared a table before a guest finished his champagne. You refilled water glasses before they were half empty. You smiled when spoken to, kept your eyes low when you weren't, and above all, you stayed invisible. Elijah was very good at being invisible. He had spent 6 years perfecting it. He pushed his cart along the edge of the East Corridor, past the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Manhattan skyline, past the silent auction tables draped in ivory linen, past the knot of hedge fund managers arguing about real estate in Dubai. His cart made a faint squeak. The left wheel had been loose for 3 weeks, and the maintenance department kept forgetting to fix it, and he had learned to tilt the handle slightly to the right to stop the noise. Details like that. That was what his life had become. Solving small problems quietly so that other people never had to notice them. The Ashford Grand's annual charity gala raised money for a rotating list of causes. This year, it was arts education in underfunded public schools, which Elijah found quietly ironic given what those 300 guests actually knew about art. He had overheard 2 of them near the silent auction debating whether a particular abstract painting was worth the $60,000 opening bid, and neither of them had mentioned anything about the artist, the technique, or the meaning. They talked only about whether the investment would appreciate. He kept moving. The centerpiece of the main ballroom was a Steinway Model D concert grand piano, 9 feet of handcrafted German engineering, finished in a lacquered ebony black that caught the chandelier light like still water. It sat on a raised platform at the far end of the room, roped off behind a velvet barrier positioned like a trophy rather than an instrument. A small placard on the stand beside it read, "Donated for silent auction. Reserve price, $200,000. Elijah had walked past that piano 4 times already that evening. Each time he slowed his cart by half a step. Each time he made himself keep walking. He knew that instrument, the way a man knows the face of someone he used to love. The Steinway Model D was the piano he had practiced on during his 2nd year at the conservatory. Room 14B, 3rd floor. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. He had spent 300 hours in that room learning Ravel, Debussy, and Mozart, the K466 Concerto, specifically, which his professor, Dr. Gerald Marsh, had called technically the most honest piece Mozart ever wrote, because it demands that the pianist stops performing and starts confessing. Elijah had been 23 years old when he understood what that meant. He was 39 now, pushing a squeaky cart at a charity gala and understanding it all over again in a different way. He stopped near a service column on the eastern wall and checked his phone. 9:47 p.m. He was scheduled until midnight. He had a half-hour break coming at 10, which he usually spent in the loading dock behind the kitchen, eating whatever the staff meal was and reading on his phone. Tonight, it was going to be a chicken sandwich, and if he was lucky, a corner of quiet. He was thinking about that sandwich when he heard Vivian Ashford laugh. He had seen her before, of course. You couldn't work this building for 2 years without knowing Vivian Ashford by sight. She was 41, the sole heir to the Ashford Group, which controlled $14 billion in real estate, private equity, and media holdings. She was the kind of woman who filled a room not because she was loud, but because she was precise. Every gesture calculated, every word weighted, every silence intentional. She wore her wealth the way other women wore perfume. You couldn't see it, but you felt it the moment she was near you. Tonight she was in a gown, the color of deep ocean water. Her dark hair pulled back severely. diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. She was moving through the room with a glass of champagne in one hand and the effortless authority of someone who had never once in her life worried about whether she belonged somewhere. She was also, Elijah noted without particular emotion, heading directly toward the Steinway. She stopped in front of it, tilted her head, and ran one perfectly manicured finger along the top of the piano with the casual ownership of someone who was already mentally signing the check. 3 men in expensive suits orbited her, 2 of them he recognized as board members of the Ashford Group. One he didn't know. They were laughing at something she had just said. Elijah turned back to his cart. That was when the wheel squeaked. Not the faint, controlled squeak he had learned to suppress. The full, loud, embarrassing squeak, the kind that turned heads. The cart had drifted slightly on the polished marble floor, and the wheel caught an uneven seam and produced a sound like a stepped-on dog toy directly behind Vivian Ashford and her 3-man audience. Every head in a 10-foot radius turned, including hers. Vivian Ashford looked at Elijah Carter with the same expression she had used on the abstract painting earlier, a rapid clinical assessment, and then a judgment rendered so quickly it was almost reflexive. She saw the uniform. The gray shirt with the building's service logo on the chest. The dark pants with the crease ironed in 2 weeks ago and not since. The shoes black, worn smooth at the toe, practical. The gloves tucked into his front pocket. The cart with its cleaning supplies, its trash bag, its roll of paper towels. She looked at him for maybe 2 seconds, and then she looked at the piano he was standing beside, and something shifted behind her eyes. Something mean and playful, and practiced the look of a woman who had learned a long time ago that humor was a kind of power. "Excuse me." Elijah looked up. She was talking to him. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that had nothing warm in it. "Are you admiring our piano?" The men around her straightened slightly. The kind of subtle readjustment that meant they knew what was coming and were positioning themselves to watch. "I was just passing by." "Just passing by." She repeated it like she was tasting it, finding it lacking. "You know what this is, don't you? This is a Steinway Model D. It's the same piano Carnegie Hall uses. $200,000. She paused. "Do you know what that means?" "It means it's expensive." She laughed. It was a bright silvery laugh, the kind designed to carry. "It means it's for people who can appreciate it." She tilted her head slightly. "No offense." None taken. But she wasn't done. He could tell by the way her eyes moved to her audience, checking that she still had them, confirming they were still enjoying this. "Tell me something." She stepped slightly closer. "Have you ever played a piano like this?" And here was the moment, the hinge point, that Elijah would later understand, changed the entire trajectory of both their lives, where he should have said no and kept moving. He said, once or twice. The silence that followed was not long, but it was complete. One of the board members made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a cough. Vivian's smile widened. "Really?" She looked at the piano, then back at him, then at the piano again, as if she were working out the geometry of a joke. "Well." She raised her champagne glass slightly. "I'll tell you what. If you can play this piano, really play it, not chopsticks, I'll marry you." The room around them had gone quiet in that peculiar way that happens when enough people sense that something worth watching is occurring. A pocket of silence expanding outward like ripples. People were turning. People were pulling out phones. And there it was, the joke. The performance. The thing she said with complete confidence, because she already knew the ending. He would decline, or he would try and fail, and either way, the story would be hers to tell at dinner parties for the next 6 months. The janitor who almost played the Steinway. She would make it funny. She was good at making things funny. Elijah looked at the piano. He looked at his hands. He thought about Lily. He always thought about Lily first, not because she had told him to, but because somewhere in the last 6 years she had become the voice in his head that replaced every other voice. When things got hard, when the humiliation of a particular moment pressed down on him with specific weight, he would hear her, "Daddy, you don't sound like someone who cleans floors." He reached into his front pocket and removed his cleaning gloves. He set them on the cart. The sound they made landing on the cart's metal surface was almost inaudible. But Vivian heard it. Her smile faltered just barely, just for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the sharpest observer in the room to notice if they were paying attention. Elijah walked to the velvet rope. "I'll need someone to unhook this." Nobody moved for a moment. Then one of the board members, the one whose name Elijah didn't know, looked at Vivian, not asking permission exactly, more like checking whether this had stopped being funny. Vivian kept smiling. She lifted one shoulder in a small, elegant shrug that said, "Let him try." The board member unhooked the rope. Elijah walked to the piano bench, adjusted it by 3 inches. He had always preferred the bench slightly closer than standard, and sat down. The room had gotten very quiet now. The way rooms get quiet when something unscripted is happening, and no one is sure yet whether to be entertained or uncomfortable. He put his hands in his lap for a moment. Not for drama, not for effect, just because that was what he had always done before he played a habit from Dr. Marsh, who used to say that the first thing a pianist must do before touching any key is to remember why they are sitting down. "The piano will wait for you," the old man would say. "You do not have to perform. You have to arrive." Elijah closed his eyes. He thought about Rachel. Not about losing her. He had learned over 6 years of necessary survival. How to set that particular grief aside when he needed to function. He thought about the last night she had been well enough to hear him play. November 8 years ago, in the living room of the apartment on Amsterdam Avenue. Lily already asleep. Rachel curled up on the couch with a blanket over her legs and her eyes closed, and that small specific smile she got when the music was working on her. He had played Chopin that night. Not Mozart. Rachel had always preferred Chopin. "Play me something that means something," she had said. He had played for 2 hours. He opened his eyes. He placed his hands on the keys. The first thing he played was not Mozart. He started with a passage from Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. Not the full piece, just the opening. Those first quiet questioning measures that feel less like music beginning and more like a door being pushed open in a dark house. He played it softly, almost privately, as if he were not in a ballroom at all. 3 seconds of that, and the nearest conversations died. 7 seconds, and the room was still. 10 seconds, and he could feel the shift. The specific physical change in a room's atmosphere when an audience stops anticipating and starts listening. He knew that feeling. He had felt it in practice halls and recital rooms and competition stages, and he had spent 6 years telling himself he didn't miss it, which was a lie he had gotten very good at maintaining. He transitioned without pause into the Mozart the Piano Concerto No. 20 in D minor. K. 466, the second movement, the Romance. He had chosen it not for its difficulty, though it was technically demanding, but because of what Dr. Marsh had said about it. The most honest piece Mozart ever wrote. A piece that did not perform. A piece that confessed. What it confessed was longing. Not grief exactly, not anger, not joy. Something quieter and more specific than any of those, the particular feeling of standing at the edge of a life you could have had and looking at it from a distance and finding that you can hold the looking without falling apart. That was what the Romance said. That was what Elijah had been living for 6 years. He played it the way it needed to be played. Not to impress the room, but to say something true inside a room full of people who had stopped expecting truth from anyone in a service uniform. He didn't watch the audience, but he heard them. The quiet first expanding, deepening, taking on weight. Then somewhere in the middle section, a sound he hadn't expected, a woman's indrawn breath, sharp and involuntary. The kind of sound people make when something beautiful arrives faster than they were ready for. He heard someone say very quietly, "Oh my God." He kept playing. Vivian Ashford did not move. She had been in the process of turning to say something to the man on her left, something dismissive, something that would have made him laugh and restored the moment to its proper shape when the Chopin started and the sentence died in her throat unfinished. She told herself it was just technically competent. She told herself she was simply surprised. She was still telling herself this when he moved into the Mozart and her champagne glass, which she had been holding at chest height for the last 10 minutes. Without thinking about it, slowly descended to her side. Vivian had grown up in this world, the world of galas and charity auctions, and $200,000 pianos treated as decorative objects. She had been to the Met Gala, to Carnegie Hall, to La Scala. She had sat in the front row for performances by the greatest pianists of the last 2 decades, and applauded precisely and appropriately, and gone home feeling suitably enriched. She had never felt anything like this. Because the difference, and she understood this for the first time, standing in her own ballroom holding a champagne glass at her side, with her jokes still floating in the air around her. The difference was that those performances had been for her. They had been offerings, presentations, things shaped for an audience that held the power. This was not for her. This man was not playing for her. That was the thing she couldn't process. He was playing as if she weren't there, as if the ballroom weren't there, as if the 300 people and the diamonds and the champagne and the $200,000 piano beneath his fingers were all completely beside the point. She had never in her adult life been beside the point in her own room. The feeling that moved through her then was not simple. It was not just embarrassment or surprise. It was something more disorienting, a sudden vertiginous sense that she had made a serious miscalculation. Not just about the janitor and his piano, about something larger, about what she had assumed the world contained and what it was actually holding. She turned her head very slightly to the man on her right. His face was completely still, eyes fixed on the piano, and on his face was the expression of a man watching something he had not believed existed. She turned back to Elijah Carter. She watched his hands. He played for 11 minutes. Not because he planned it to be 11 minutes, because that was where the music arrived. That was the natural landing point, the resolution. The piece moved toward the moment where the longing in the romance settled not into happiness or sorrow, but into something cleaner than either acceptance. When the last note faded, Elijah kept his hands on the keys for a breath. Then he lifted them. The silence in the room lasted 4 seconds. He counted them, and then the applause started. Not the polite, measured applause of a charity gala audience who have been trained to appreciate things at a certain volume. This was the real thing. This was the involuntary kind, the kind that starts in the hands before the brain gives permission, the kind that a room produces when something has gotten past all its defenses and done something directly to the people inside it. He stood up from the bench. He turned around. 300 people were looking at him. Most of them were clapping. Some of them were still frozen in the posture they'd been in when he started conversations. Half-finished glasses, half raised, as if the music had paused them and the return of silence hadn't yet restarted the mechanism. A woman in the front row, someone's wife, mid-60s, a string of pearls, was crying. Not dramatically, just 2 tracks of moisture on her face that she didn't seem to be aware of. A man in a dark suit near the back was already on his phone, not filming, calling. Elijah would learn later that this man was the director of programming for one of the 3 most prominent concert series in North America, and that the call was to his assistant, and that what he said was, "Find out who that man is before he leaves the building." Elijah looked at none of this. He looked at Vivian Ashford. She was standing exactly where she had been when he sat down. She had not moved. The champagne glass was still at her side, though he noticed her grip had tightened. He could see it in the whitening of her knuckles against the crystal stem. Her face was doing something complicated. Not embarrassment, or not only embarrassment. Something deeper and less controlled. Something that was working its way up through all the expensive practiced composure and not quite being contained by it. He walked toward her. The crowd parted slightly the way crowds do when they sense that something is still happening, that the performance, or whatever this was not quite finished. He stopped in front of her. She was looking at the way people look at things. They have completely misjudged, with a kind of suspended disbelief, as if the world had suddenly operated on principles she didn't have a framework for. He didn't raise his voice. There was no theater in it. He said it quietly, precisely, with the calm of a man who had spent 6 years being invisible, and had decided somewhere in the middle of a Mozart concerto that he was finished with that. The piano was never the thing you were trying to protect. She blinked. Your pride was. The room heard it. The nearest people heard it clearly, and the silence was deep enough that even those at the edges caught the tone, the shape of it, even if not every word. Vivian Ashford said nothing. There was a long moment. Elijah looked at her with no anger in his face, no triumph, no contempt, and she looked back at him with something she had no available word for, because she had never needed the word before. Then he picked up his cleaning gloves from the cart. He walked toward the service exit. The man in the dark suit was already moving after him. And behind him, in the ballroom of the Ashford Grand, the conversation that would not stop for weeks had already begun, in whispers first, then in voices, then in the particular sound of 300 people realizing at once that they had just witnessed something they would be trying to describe for the rest of their lives. What Vivian Ashford did not know yet, what none of them knew, was the story behind the 11 minutes. Not the talent. The talent they had seen. The story behind the man who had the talent and had spent 6 years deliberately hiding it, who had walked away from everything he was trained to become and done it without bitterness, without ceremony, without a single person in that building knowing it had happened. The story of a father. The story of a promise made at the side of a hospital bed. The story of a little girl named Lily who had grown up watching her father come home at midnight, smelling like cleaning solution and restaurant grease, and who had never once, not once, heard him complain about it. That was the story. And it started like all the most important stories, not with triumph. It started with a loss so complete that the man who survived it had to build himself an entirely different life just to keep breathing. It started with Rachel. Elijah Carter had met Rachel Hughes in the fall semester of his junior year at the New England Conservatory of Music, in a practice room on the second floor where she had accidentally walked in on him playing Debussy at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. He had been playing with his eyes closed, which was why he hadn't heard her knock. She had stood in the doorway for, she told him later, almost 4 minutes before she cleared her throat. He had spun around on the bench, mortified, fully prepared to apologize to whoever was there. She was leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed and the unhurried expression of someone who had arrived at a conclusion and was comfortable waiting for you to catch up to it. You play like you're arguing with someone. He had stared at her. Debussy isn't an argument. No, she agreed. He's not. But the way you were playing him was. She was a third-year violin student from Atlanta. Her father was a high school band director. Her mother taught elementary school music. She had grown up in a house where music was not a luxury or a performance. It was simply the language the family used for things that didn't fit into regular sentences. She understood him, in other words, the way very few people ever had. They were married 3 years later, 3 weeks after Elijah's acceptance to a prestigious conservatory fellowship that would have set the trajectory of his professional life for the next decade. The fellowship, the professional trajectory, the decade. All of it had been exactly 18 months away when Rachel went to the doctor about the headaches. The headaches had started in the autumn of their first year, married, small and ignorable. At first, the kind of thing you chalk up to stress and too much coffee, and the particular exhaustion of two musicians trying to build a life together on very little money. Rachel had mentioned them a few times, dismissed them herself, taken ibuprofen, kept teaching her violin lessons, kept practicing, kept being Rachel. By spring, they were something different. By summer, they had a name. Elijah would not speak the name easily, even years later. Not because it still broke him, he had found a way to carry it that didn't break him anymore, but because it had a particular weight that he respected. He did not use it casually. What it meant practically was this. The treatment would be long, expensive, and brutal. The timeline was uncertain. The outcome was uncertain. What was certain was that someone needed to be present fully, consistently, reliably present for whatever came next. Rachel told him to keep the fellowship. "This doesn't change what you are," she said. They were sitting at the kitchen table in their apartment on Amsterdam Avenue. The acceptance letter between them and Rachel was looking at it with the precise, unsentimental clarity that he loved about her, and that the illness infuriatingly had not taken from her. You have to go. I'm not going anywhere. Elijah. I'm not going anywhere, Rachel. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that he expected an argument she was when she had decided she was right about something formidable. Instead, she reached across the table and put her hand over his. Okay, she said. Okay. She never asked him to reconsider. He never offered to. It was one of those conversations that closes a door so completely that neither person feels the need to check whether it's locked. He withdrew from the fellowship. He found 3 jobs in the same week: an overnight cleaning position at a commercial building in Midtown, a daytime hours teaching position at a community music school in the Bronx that paid $12 an hour, and a weekend shift at a catering company that needed someone to set up and break down events. He was 27 years old. He took all 3. 2 years. That was how long they had. Not good years, not bad years. They were simply years full of specific ordinary moments that he had memorized with the involuntary precision of a man who suspected he was losing something he could not replace. The smell of the apartment in winter, the particular creak of the 3rd step of their building's staircase, the way Rachel laughed when he played something wrong on purpose to make her catch a wrong note on her violin, the sound of Lily learning to walk in the hallway and then falling and laughing at herself. Lily had been born 14 months after the diagnosis. There was a whole conversation about that too, a conversation they had at midnight on a night when Rachel was feeling for the first time in weeks like herself. And the conclusion of that conversation was that Rachel's feeling on the matter was that life did not wait for circumstances to be convenient, and that a daughter was not a problem to be solved, but a gift to be accepted. Lily arrived in February. She had Rachel's eyes and Elijah's hands, those long, careful fingers that wrapped around his thumb in the hospital room, and held on with a grip that he still sometimes thought about when things got difficult. Rachel died on a Tuesday in November when Lily was 2 years old. She died at 7 in the morning with Elijah holding her right hand and Lily asleep in the next room, and she died knowing he believed this completely, that she was leaving them in the right hands. He had held it together through the funeral, through the logistics, the paperwork, the phone calls, the grief of other people that he found himself managing even as his own sat in his chest like a stone he had swallowed and couldn't locate exactly. He held it together until the 3rd night after the funeral, when he sat down at the upright piano he had managed to acquire second-hand and placed on the east wall of the living room and tried to play. And couldn't. Not technically. His fingers still knew what to do. The muscle memory was there intact, 6 years of training that didn't leave just because a person was broken. But the sound that came out was wrong. It was correct, but wrong. It was like hearing someone describe a conversation you had years ago, all the words right and all the meaning missing. He sat at the piano for 45 minutes, and then he closed the fallboard over the keys. He didn't open it again for 8 months. Chaw! When he started playing again, it was not in front of anyone. It was after midnight in the community center 3 blocks from their apartment, in the room where the Tuesday music class was held. The instructor left the key with Elijah by this point. He was also doing building maintenance for the center on weekends, and she trusted him, and he had taken to letting himself in after his overnight shift in the 4-hour window between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. when the city had its quietest breath. He played alone. Never anything complete, just passages, fragments, the technical exercises that kept his hands from forgetting, and occasionally a piece he had loved before, approached now with the caution of a man entering a room where something painful had happened, and wanting to understand if he was ready to be in it again. Lily started asking about it when she was 4. "Daddy, I heard you playing last night." He had been making her breakfast, and he'd looked up from the skillet. "You were supposed to be asleep." "I woke up." She was looking at him with those eyes, Rachel's eyes, focused and undeflectable. "You sounded like crying, but with the piano." He turned back to the skillet. "Go get your shoes." But she had kept asking. At 4, then at 5, then at 6 and 7, she had kept finding the edges of it, the hours he was gone, the calluses on his hands that were different from the ones you got from cleaning work, the way he sometimes sat at the community center's upright piano on afternoons, when he picked her up from the summer program there, and ran his fingers over the closed fallboard without opening it. She was 8 years old when she finally heard him play properly. He had not meant for it to happen. He had come in from his shift, and she had not been asleep as he thought, and he had sat down at the piano in the living room, the old upright. A better one now, acquired from a music school that was replacing their instruments, and he had started playing the Romance from the K466 without thinking, just because his hands needed it, just because some nights the stone in his chest needed to be addressed with something that wasn't language. He had been playing for 6 minutes when he heard her. She was standing in the doorway of the hallway, in her pajamas, with her feet bare on the floor, and she was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, or rather had seen before in a different face, on a different night, in a different apartment. Rachel's expression, when music was doing something to her. He stopped playing. "Don't stop," Lily said. "Lily, it's 2 in the morning. Dad." She walked into the room and sat on the couch, tucking her feet under herself. "Please don't stop." He looked at her. He looked at the piano. He turned back to the keys, and he played the rest of the movement. When he finished, the apartment was quiet. "Why do you hide it?" Lily asked. "I don't hide it." "You play at 2 in the morning when you think I'm asleep. That's hiding." He was quiet for a moment. "Some dreams have to wait." Wait for what? I didn't have an answer for that. He had told himself for when things are better, and for when Lily is older, and for when there's time, and for when I have something left over to give it, and all of those answers were true, and none of them were quite the real answer, which was that the music was so bound up in Rachel and in the life that he had chosen to leave, that playing it in the open felt dangerous, felt like it would unmoor something he had worked very hard to keep stable. "I don't know," he said finally. Lily looked at him with Rachel's eyes. "Daddy." She said it carefully, the way children say things when they have been thinking about them for a while. "You don't sound like someone who cleans floors." He looked at her. "You sound like someone who belongs on a stage." The thing that moved through him then was not simple, and he could not have named it cleanly. It was made of several things at once: love for the 8-year-old sitting on his couch in her pajamas, grief for the woman whose eyes were looking at him from that 8-year-old's face, and something smaller and more stubborn at the center of all of it. The faint, persistent, inconvenient flicker of a thing he had told himself was gone. He closed the fallboard. "Go to bed, baby." She went. But she had said it, and he could not make himself unhear it. So that was Elijah Carter on the night of the Ashford Gala, a man carrying 6 years of compressed music inside him, like a pressure system, holding it in place with the discipline of someone who had decided that survival came first, and everything else waited in line. I was not angry at Vivian Ashford for the joke. He understood what she had done, and why she had done it. He had been watching people like her for 6 years, from his particular angle of view, and he understood the mechanics of that specific kind of cruelty better than she probably understood it herself. It was not malice exactly. It was thoughtlessness, operating at the speed of privilege, the kind of carelessness that comes naturally to people who have never had to consider that the invisible figures around them might have interior lives worth considering. He did not hate her for it, but he was finished accommodating it. When he walked to that velvet rope, when he adjusted the bench and placed his hands in his lap, when he closed his eyes and thought of Rachel, it was not defiance that moved through him. It was decision. He had made a choice somewhere in those 10 seconds before the first note that he was going to stop waiting. Not because Vivian had provoked him into it, not to win a moment in a ballroom, but because Lily was 8 years old and had her mother's eyes and had told him something true, and the truest things in a life have a way of collecting interest until they demand acknowledgement. "You sound like someone who belongs on a stage." Elijah played the piano that night, not to prove something to the room. He played it to prove something to himself. And the room, 300 people, the diamonds, the champagne, the $200,000 instrument, Vivian Ashford, and her practiced composure and her joke, the room received it. As rooms always do when someone in them finally stops performing and starts confessing. What came next? The recording that appeared on social media within 40 minutes of his last note. The phone call that found him in the loading dock during his break. The conversation with a man whose name he had known for 15 years as a name attached to concert halls, and not as a number in his phone that was the beginning of a different story. But to understand that story, you have to understand this one. You have to understand the years before the night. You have to understand what it costs a man to carry something like that in silence. And you have to understand Lily, because Lily is how all of it makes sense. The loading dock behind the Ashford Grand smelled like cold concrete and diesel, and the particular staleness of a kitchen that had been running for 8 hours straight. Elijah sat on an overturned milk crate with his back against the wall, and his phone face down on his knee, and a chicken sandwich that had gone lukewarm sitting in its wrapper beside him, untouched. He had been in this exact spot for 4 minutes. His hands were shaking. Not the way hands shake from cold or from fear. The way they shook after a long performance, that specific tremor of muscles that have been held in precise tension for an extended period and are now releasing slowly, one fiber at a time. He remembered this feeling. He had forgotten that he remembered it. The body keeps its own archives apparently separate from the ones the mind builds and sometimes dismantles on purpose. He pressed his hands flat against his thighs and breathed. The door behind him pushed open. Marcus, one of the kitchen crew, a broad man in his late 40s with flour still on his left forearm, leaned out with his own sandwich and stopped when he saw Elijah's face. "You good?" "Fine." Marcus looked at him for a moment, with the unconvinced expression of a man who had raised 3 children and knew what fine actually meant. "Someone said you played the piano up there." "I played the piano." "Someone said you played it like—" Marcus paused, searching for the right word. "Like you built the thing." Elijah picked up his sandwich. He unwrapped it without looking at it. "It was just a piano." "Right." Marcus sat down on a produce crate a few feet away and bit into his own food and said nothing else for a while, which was one of the reasons Elijah had always appreciated him. Marcus understood that some things did not require conversation. He was one of 3 people in Elijah's daily life who understood this, and Elijah was quietly grateful for him at regular intervals. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Marcus said, "Your phone's been buzzing." "I know. A lot." "I know, Marcus." Another silence. "You gonna look at it?" Elijah set down his sandwich. He picked up the phone. He turned it over. 11 missed calls. 3 of them from numbers he didn't recognize. 2 from his mother-in-law Gloria, which meant Lily had somehow already heard something. Lily at 13 now, who had the social awareness of someone twice her age and the information network of a small intelligence agency. 4 texts from coworkers he barely knew. And 1 from a number stored only as D. Holloway NEC, which was a contact he had not thought about in almost a decade. David Holloway, director of the National Ensemble Concert Series, a man whose name had been attached to the careers of 11 pianists Elijah had followed from a respectful distance over the last 6 years. He stared at the name. "Marcus." "Yeah." "Go back inside." "Okay." Marcus stood, gathered his wrapper. "For what it's worth." He paused at the door. "I always wondered why a man with hands like yours was cleaning floors." The door closed behind him. Elijah sat alone in the loading dock and looked at David Holloway's number and felt the particular vertigo of a life that has been moving in one direction for 6 years, suddenly encountering a force perpendicular to everything. He called Lily first. She picked up on the second ring. "Dad." Her voice was doing the thing it did when she was containing excitement with great effort and not entirely succeeding. "Dad, someone posted a video." "What video?" "Of you. At the piano. At that gala thing. Dad, it has 40,000 views." He closed his eyes. 40,000? She stopped herself. He could hear her breathing. "Dad, it's been like 40 minutes. Lily. "You sound like Mozart." I mean not you. The comments say they're saying you sound like Dad. Someone in the comments said they cried. Like a grown man said he cried. Lily. He waited until she stopped. "Is Gloria there?" "She's right here. She's been staring at the video for 20 minutes with her hand over her mouth." "Tell her I'm fine. Tell her I'll be home by 1. "But—" "Lily." A pause. "Yeah. We'll talk when I get home." "Okay." "Okay." Another pause, shorter. "Dad." "Yeah, baby." I told you. He couldn't answer that. He sat with it for a moment, the specific weight of being told something true by someone who loved you, and having run out of reasons not to believe it. Go to bed. I'll see you at 1. He hung up. He looked at David Holloway's number. He called it. It rang once. I was wondering if you'd call back. The voice on the other end was precisely as Elijah remembered it. Measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years in rooms where patience was a professional requirement. I'm David Holloway. I don't know if you remember the name. I know who you are. Good. Then I'll skip the introduction. A brief pause. I was at the Ashford Gala tonight. I was standing near the back when you sat down. I want you to know that I have been doing this work for a long time, and I have a specific physical response to the real thing when I encounter it, and I had that response tonight. Elijah said nothing. I'd like to meet with you. Not a conversation, not a phone call, a proper meeting. I want to hear you play in a controlled setting. I want to understand what we're working with. Mr. Holloway, I know what you're going to say. I haven't said anything. You're going to tell me it's complicated. You're going to tell me it's been a long time. You're going to tell me you have responsibilities, obligations, a life that runs on a specific track, and that getting off that track is not as simple as, I have a 13-year-old daughter. Silence on the other end. A real one. She's the reason I stopped, Elijah continued. And she's the reason I played tonight. And she is the first thing I think about before I make any decision about anything. So when you ask me to meet with you, I need you to understand that it's not about whether I want to. It's about whether it's something I can do without disrupting the only thing I've spent the last 6 years making sure is stable. Another silence longer. Okay, Holloway said. Tell me about her. Elijah blinked. Tell me about your daughter. It was not what he had expected. He had expected enthusiasm or persuasion, or the gentle pressure of professional interest asserting itself. He had not expected tell me about your daughter. He looked at the loading dock wall, the concrete, the yellow paint on the pipes running along the ceiling. Her name is Lily. She's 13. She plays violin. She started at 4, taught herself most of the first year, which her teacher at the time told me was either remarkable or concerning, and she wasn't sure which. She's in 8th grade. She gets A's in everything except gym, and she gets A-minuses in gym because she refuses to change the way she holds a tennis racket, even though her form is wrong, because she decided in 6th grade that her grip was correct and her teacher was mistaken, and she has maintained that position for 2 years. He stopped. On the other end, David Holloway made a sound that was almost a laugh. She sounds like someone I'd like to meet. She sounds like her mother. The pause that followed was the kind that happens when a sentence lands with more weight than the speaker intended, and both parties feel it. How long? Holloway asked, quietly. 11 years. I'm sorry. So am I. He cleared his throat. She was a violinist, Rachel. She was better than me. That's a significant statement given what I heard tonight. It's a true one. He picked up his sandwich wrapper, folded it once. She never got to perform, not professionally. She was in treatment before she got the chance. Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then I think you should consider the possibility, he said carefully, that playing is not something you're doing for yourself, or not only for yourself. Elijah did not respond. I'll send you my assistant's contact information. No pressure, no timeline. When you're ready to talk further, reach out. A brief pause. And Mr. Carter, the Mozart tonight, the romance, the way you handled the transition into the recapitulation, that was a choice, not an accident. That was interpretation. I want you to know that I noticed it. The call ended. Elijah sat in the loading dock for another 10 minutes. Then he put his phone in his pocket, left the uneaten sandwich on the crate, and went back inside to finish his shift. He had 4 hours of work left. He did them. He got home at 12:47 a.m. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on 143rd Street, 3 bedrooms, which was one more than they had been able to afford for the first 2 years after Rachel died, and which they had been in now for 4 years. It was not a beautiful apartment. The radiator made a sound in winter, like someone tapping a pipe with a small hammer. The kitchen window faced a brick wall. The hallway light on the third floor had been out for 6 weeks, and the landlord had replaced it twice with bulbs that were slightly the wrong wattage, and that created a faint amber shadow instead of actual light. But it was theirs. He had made it theirs, specific and familiar and safe in all the ways that matter. The living room light was on. Lily was on the couch. She was supposed to be asleep. She was not asleep. She was sitting cross-legged with her phone in her lap and her violin case on the couch beside her. She kept it close, the way other kids kept stuffed animals, and she looked up when he came through the door with the expression of someone who has been preparing a very specific look for the last hour and a half. "I told you not to wait up." "I wasn't waiting up. I was sitting up. There's a difference." He put his keys on the hook by the door. He took off his jacket. He was aware with the particular exhaustion of a man who has been running on compressed emotion since roughly 9:47 p.m. that he needed to handle this conversation with some care. How many views? Her face did the thing. The thing where she was trying to be calm, and the numbers were fighting the calm from the inside. 212,000. He sat down in the chair across from her. "Dad." "I know. 200 and... I know, Lily. It's been 3 hours." He looked at his hands. The calluses on his fingertips slightly rougher than they should have been, because cleaning work did things to your skin that made the fine control harder, and he had spent years compensating for it in the hours before dawn. "People are saying things in the comments." She hesitated. "Do you want to know what they're saying?" "Not tonight. Some of them are..." She stopped. "Dad, some of them are talking about Mom." He looked up. "They don't know about her specifically, but they can feel something in the way you play. Some people are writing that they don't know why, but they cried. And someone wrote..." She looked down at her phone, then up at him. "Someone wrote whoever he lost, he never stopped playing for them." The silence in the apartment had its own texture, the specific quiet of 1 a.m. in a building where everyone else was asleep, and the city outside had reduced itself to distant traffic and the occasional far-off horn. Elijah looked at his daughter. He saw Rachel's eyes open and direct, and completely unwilling to look away from things that mattered. "A man called me tonight," he said, "after I got off stage. His name is David Holloway. He runs a concert series." Lily went very still. "He wants to meet with me, hear me play in a proper setting." She said nothing. She was looking at him with the careful attention of someone who understood that this was a moment that required something more than reaction. "I don't know what I'm going to do about it yet," Elijah continued. "I need to think. I need to understand what it would mean for the schedule, for the finances, for school." "Dad." "Lily, I'm not going to make any decision that affects..." "Dad." She uncrossed her legs and put her feet on the floor and leaned forward. "I'm 13. I'm not 8 anymore. You don't have to protect me from good things." He looked at her. "I know you think that every decision has to go through this filter where you check whether it's safe for me first. And I know why. And I love you for it." She held his eyes. "But I've been watching you come home from that job for 6 years. And I know what it costs you. And I am telling you right now that if you turn down this meeting because of me, I will never forgive you." The last sentence came out harder than she intended. He could see her recalibrate, slightly pulling back from the edge of it. "I mean," she amended, "I will forgive you, obviously. But I'll be very disappointed." He almost smiled. "You sound like your mother." "Good." He stood up. He crossed the room and put his hand on the top of her head, the way he had since she was a toddler, and she let him, which she didn't always anymore. "Go to bed." "You'll call him." "I'll think about it." "Dad." "Lily." He looked down at her. "I said I'll think about it. That's not a no." She studied him for a moment with Rachel's eyes. "Okay," she said. "That's okay." She picked up her violin case, tucked it under her arm, and walked to her room. At the door, she paused. 212,000 views, Dad. And it's still going up." She closed the door. He stood in the living room alone. He looked at the upright piano against the east wall. He walked to it. He sat down. He lifted the fallboard. He did not play. He just sat there with his hands hovering above the keys, not quite touching them, in the particular posture of a man who is standing at the edge of a decision and checking whether the ground beneath him is solid. After a long time, he lowered the fallboard. He turned off the living room light. He went to bed. But he did not sleep for a very long time. Vivian Ashford did not sleep either. She was in the back seat of her car, the black car, the one with the privacy partition that she kept raised. Not because she distrusted her driver, but because she needed sometimes spaces where she was not being looked at, and she was staring at her own reflection in the darkened window and doing something she did not often do. She was reviewing her behavior, not in the careful, strategic way she reviewed business decisions. In the uncomfortable, involuntary way that happens when you've done something and the doing of it has left a residue you can't quite wash off. She had made the joke, the "play this piano, and I'll marry you" joke in the specific key of things she had said 1,000 times at 1,000 events. The throwaway quip. The offhand cruelty that was not cruelty technically, because it was said lightly, and everyone knew it was said lightly, and the target was meant to understand that he was simply a prop in a moment of entertainment and not take it personally. Except, the problem was the 11 minutes. The problem was that the man she had tried to make a prop had sat down and produced something that she was still in the back of her car at nearly 1 a.m. hearing. The romance. Those first measures of the Chopin. The way the Mozart had moved through the room, not like entertainment, but like a statement, quiet and irrefutable, and directed at no one, and therefore at everyone. She had laughed at him. She had made 300 people laugh at him. And then he had sat down and showed her, not angrily, not vengefully, but with the simple, devastating calm of someone who has long since stopped needing anyone's permission to be what they are, shown her exactly what she had been laughing at. Her phone buzzed. Her PR director. She declined it. It buzzed again. Her assistant. She declined that too. She looked at her reflection. There was something she could not stop returning to. Not the music. Not even his face when he stood up from the piano bench. It was what he had said when he walked toward her. The thing she had tried to process in front of 300 people without visibly processing it. The piano was never the thing you were trying to protect. Your pride was. She had lived her entire life, 41 years, in a world where people did not speak to her like that, where the natural order of any room placed her at the top of its social hierarchy, and where the people beneath her in that hierarchy maintained it with the consistent courtesy of people who needed something from her or feared the loss of what they had from her. Nobody had ever said something true to her face in public. Not like that. Not without softening it, qualifying it, dressing it up in the diplomatic language of people who were simultaneously trying to tell her something and protect themselves from her response. He had just said it, plainly, quietly, and then walked away. And the most disorienting part, the part she kept circling back to in the dark of the car, was that he had said it without anger, without triumph. He hadn't been trying to wound her. He was simply reporting an observation, the way a person reports a fact about the weather. With the uninterested certainty of someone who is no longer invested in whether you believe them or not. That was what she couldn't categorize. She was used to anger. She had provoked enough of it to have developed a very complete understanding of its texture and how to handle it. She was even used to contempt, though it was rarer the contempt of people who disapproved of her world and said so with the moral satisfaction of the righteous. She was not used to indifference, real indifference, the kind that didn't need anything from her, the kind that walked away from a ballroom of 300 people applauding and didn't look back. She pulled out her phone. She searched the video. It was already at nearly 250,000 views. The comments were longer than she was used to reading, but she read them anyway, scrolling slowly, standing on the edge of something she couldn't quite name. I don't know this man. I don't know his story. But I've been sitting in my car for 20 minutes because I can't stop watching this. My father was a musician who gave up his career to raise us. This destroyed me. The way she looked at him afterward. She knows. You can see it on her face. She knows exactly what she just did. She stopped on that one. She read it 3 times. Her driver turned onto the avenue that led to her building, and she looked up at the familiar skyline without seeing it. Her whole life, she had operated on a principle so embedded, she had never consciously identified it, that the room arranges itself around the person with the most power. That the people at the edges of the room, the servers, the cleaners, the workers in uniforms, were at the edges because that was where they fit. Not because she had placed them there, but because the world had, and she was simply observing the world accurately. Tonight, the world had demonstrated something different. The most powerful thing in that room had been 11 minutes of music played by a man in a cleaning uniform, and it had rearranged everything. The silence, the posture, the attention, the subsequent conversations. The 4 phone calls she had already declined from people who wanted to know who he was and how she had found him, as if she had curated him deliberately, as if he were another asset in her portfolio. He was not an asset in her portfolio. How was a man who had been cleaning her floors? She did not examine that thought all the way to its conclusion. Not tonight. Tonight the thought was large enough already. The car stopped in front of her building. She sat for a moment. Ms. Ashford. I know. She picked up her bag. I know. She got out of the car and went inside and stood in her apartment. The apartment that cost what Elijah Carter earned in 11 years, and looked at the view that she had paid a specific and substantial premium for the Manhattan skyline at 1 in the morning, and found that it looked exactly as it always had. She had expected it to look different. It did not. She went to her desk and opened her laptop and looked at the Ashford Group Foundation's portfolio, the philanthropic arm which she had established 5 years ago to satisfy both her conscience and her tax attorney, and which had been doing adequate and appropriate work ever since, without requiring a great deal of her direct attention. She looked at the Arts Education Division. 2 scholarships annually, a partnership with a music school in Brooklyn, a small grant program for arts organizations in underserved communities. All of it competently run, all of it generating the appropriate amount of positive press, all of it existing at a specific and managed distance from the world where people like Elijah Carter were cleaning floors in buildings like the one she owned. She sat with that for a while. Her PR director called again. This time she answered. Vivian, we need to get ahead of this video before morning. I'm not getting ahead of it. Silence. I'm sorry. I'm not issuing a statement. I'm not doing damage control. I'm not framing the narrative. She looked at the foundation portfolio on her screen. I played a joke at a man's expense, and it turns out he was a better person than I gave him credit for. The appropriate response to that is not a press release. Another silence longer. Vivian. With respect, the optics of... I know what the optics are, Sarah. I was there. She closed the foundation portfolio. Go home. I'll call you tomorrow. She ended the call. She sat at her desk for a long time in the quiet apartment with the skyline behind her. At some point, she opened a new document on her laptop and started writing. Not a press release. Not a statement. Something private. Something she was putting down in words because it needed to go somewhere outside her head. She wrote, Tonight a man I tried to humiliate showed 300 people, something I have spent my whole life in buildings full of and never actually seen. She stopped. She read it back. She closed the laptop. She was not ready to finish that sentence yet. But she knew with the specific certainty of someone who had built a career on the reliable assessment of value that it was a sentence that would eventually require completion, and that completing it was going to cost her something. The video hit 1 million views by 7 a.m. Elijah knew this because Lily was standing at the door of his bedroom at 7:03 with her phone extended like a piece of evidence. 1 million dad. He had been awake for 20 minutes, lying in the dark, running numbers, not musical numbers, financial ones. What a meeting with Holloway would realistically lead to. What a lead time for performance preparation looked like. What Lily's school schedule required from him in the next 4 months, and whether that schedule had any flexibility in it. He sat up. He looked at the number on her screen. 1,240,000 views in roughly 9 hours from a ballroom in Manhattan, where he had done the thing he had been not doing for 6 years. You need to eat breakfast, he said. Dad. Lily. Breakfast. Then school. She lowered the phone. She was looking at him with a patience that was slightly too large for a 13-year-old. The kind of patience that gets built in children who grow up understanding that the adults around them are carrying things. Are you scared? He looked at her. Because it's okay if you are. Go eat breakfast. I'm just saying. Lily Marie Carter, if you are not in that kitchen in 30 seconds. Okay. She turned toward the door, then stopped. For the record, I'm not scared. In case you need someone in your corner who isn't scared. She walked out. He sat on the edge of his bed in the early light with the city already running outside his window, and he thought about Rachel the way he did every morning, briefly, cleanly, without letting it pull. And then he thought about Holloway's number in his phone, and about the romance, and about the 11 minutes, and about 1,240,000 strangers who had apparently felt something. He picked up his phone. He texted Holloway's number, "This is Elijah Carter. I'm ready to meet." He set the phone down. He went to make his daughter breakfast. David Holloway's office was on the 14th floor of a building on West 57th Street, 4 blocks from Carnegie Hall, which Elijah suspected was not accidental. Men like Holloway kept themselves close to the things that mattered to them, the way other men kept photographs. The assistant had told him to come at 10. He arrived at 9:51 and sat in the waiting area for 9 minutes with his jacket folded across his lap and his hands resting on top of it still. The receptionist had offered him coffee twice. He had declined twice. He was not capable of holding a cup steadily enough right now to make the attempt worth it. He was wearing the best thing he owned. Dark slacks, a charcoal gray shirt, a jacket he had bought 3 years ago for a parent-teacher conference and worn 4 times since. He had looked at himself in the bathroom mirror that morning and tried to see what 300 people in a ballroom had seen 9 days ago and found that he could not locate it from this angle. Lily had straightened his collar before he left. "You look good, Dad." "I look like someone going to a job interview." "You are going to a job interview." "It's not a—" He had stopped. "It's a meeting." "Dad?" She had put both hands on his shoulders and looked at him with the level seriousness of someone delivering important information. "It's okay to want this. You're allowed to want this." He had left before she could say anything else, because if she had said anything else, he was not confident he would have made it out of the apartment without his composure doing something embarrassing. The office door opened at exactly 10. David Holloway was older than Elijah had expected. Mid-70s lean, with the deliberate, careful movement of a man who had learned to conserve energy without losing authority. His handshake was precise. His office was large but not ostentatious, and every surface was covered with the organized archaeology of a long career. Programs, photographs, correspondence awards that had been placed on shelves rather than displayed as if they were reference material rather than trophies. "Sit down, Mr. Carter." Elijah sat. Holloway moved to his own chair behind the desk, lowered himself into it, and studied Elijah with the same unhurried attention that had characterized every exchange they'd had, as if he had made a decision a long time ago, that the most valuable thing he could offer any situation was his complete and undivided patience. "How are you sleeping?" Elijah blinked. "Not well," he admitted. "The video. Forget the video for a moment." Holloway leaned back slightly. "The video is a fact. It exists, and it's doing what it's doing, and that will continue regardless of what either of us decides in this room. I'm asking how you're sleeping, because what happened 9 days ago was significant, and significant things have a physical cost, and I want to understand the condition of the instrument before I start talking about what I'd like to do with it." "The instrument. You, your hands, your head, your nervous system." He was not being unkind. He was being precise. "You went from cleaning floors at midnight to 1.4 million views in 9 hours. That's a seismic event in a person's life. I've seen it happen to younger musicians in controlled situations, and it still costs them. For a man who's been operating the way you've been operating alone, invisible, contained, I imagine the cost is something specific." Elijah looked at him. "I haven't been sleeping more than 4 hours at a time," he said. "I keep waking up and reaching for my phone, which I don't do. I'm not someone who checks his phone in the middle of the night." "What do you do when you wake up?" "I sit at the piano." He paused. "I don't always play. Sometimes I just sit there." Holloway nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Tell me about your training. The full picture, not the version on whatever brief profile someone put together for me." So, Elijah told him. He started at the beginning. The upright piano in his childhood home in Baltimore, his mother who played gospel on Sunday mornings, and had noticed when he was 5 years old that he was picking out melodies on the keys with an accuracy that went beyond the usual childhood fumbling. The church music director who had given him his first real lessons. The scholarship to the Baltimore School for the Arts at 12. The full conservatory scholarship at 18. Dr. Gerald Marsh and the Tuesday-Thursday afternoons in room 14B, and the things the old man had said about Mozart that Elijah had spent the next 20 years understanding. He told him about Rachel. He told him about the fellowship he had turned down. He said it plainly without the self-pity that he had learned over years to keep surgically removed from the telling of it, because self-pity was a luxury for people who hadn't decided they were at peace with their choices. Holloway listened without interrupting. When Elijah finished, the office was quiet for a moment. "You said Rachel was better than you," Holloway said finally. "Yes. What did that sound like specifically?" It was an unusual question. Elijah considered it. "She played Sibelius the way most people can't play anything, the violin concerto. She was 24 the last time she performed it publicly, and I sat in the third row, and I remember thinking this person is going to be significant. I was already at the conservatory, already being called gifted by people whose opinions I respected, and I sat in that row and understood that I was in the presence of something larger than what I was." "And that didn't threaten you?" "No. It made me love her more." He said it simply. "Because she did with music what I was always reaching for. She got all the way there, every time." Holloway was quiet for a moment. "What you played at the gala," he said, "the romance. The transition into the recapitulation, you slowed the tempo by approximately 8 beats per minute and held the suspension 2 counts longer than the score indicates. That's a significant interpretive choice. Walk me through it." Elijah looked at him. "That's not a question most people would ask." "No, it's a question I ask." He thought about it. "The standard tempo in that passage feels efficient. It arrives at the resolution correctly, but it doesn't earn it. It doesn't ask the listener to wait long enough to actually feel what's being resolved." He paused. "Rachel used to say that music either earns its moments or it doesn't. The resolution in the romance needs to be earned. You have to make the listener hold their breath for it." Holloway looked at him steadily. "You've been alone in rooms at 2 in the morning for 6 years, developing an interpretive philosophy," he said. "And I wonder if you understand how rare that is. Most pianists your age who've been out of the professional world for this long, if they've maintained their technical skill at all, which in itself is remarkable, have lost the internal conversation, the dialogue between the musician and the music. They can play the notes. They've lost the argument." He leaned forward slightly. "You haven't lost the argument, Mr. Carter. If anything, you've deepened it." Elijah absorbed this. "I'd like to hear you play," Holloway said. "There's a Steinway in the rehearsal room down the hall. Not a Model D, a B211. Slightly smaller, brighter sound. I want to hear you in a controlled space with no audience and no adrenaline and no public stakes. I want to hear what you actually are." "What do you want me to play?" "Whatever you'd play at 2 in the morning when no one's watching." The rehearsal room was small and acoustically treated, and the Steinway B211 was positioned in the center of it with the kind of unassuming confidence of a very good instrument that has nothing to prove. Holloway sat in a chair near the door. He did not take out a notepad. He did not look at his phone. He simply sat and waited. Elijah sat at the piano. He adjusted the bench. He put his hands in his lap. "I thought about what he played at 2 in the morning alone in the community center on Amsterdam Avenue, or in the living room of the apartment on 143rd Street, in the hours when no one was watching, and there was no reason to be anything other than honest. He played Schubert, the Sonata in B-flat major, D. 960, the last piano. Sonata Schubert wrote completed 2 months before his death at 31. It was not a showy piece. It made no demands on the listener's applause instinct. It was long and interior, and occasionally so quiet that in a large hall you had to fight the acoustics to hear it. It was the piece he had learned to understand grief with, not because it was sad. It was more complex than sad. It was the sound of a man looking at everything he had made and finding that it was enough, even though the making of it had cost him everything, even though the time to make more of it was running out. It was the sound of acceptance without resignation, peace without indifference. He played it the way he played it alone, all 42 minutes of it. When he finished, the room was very quiet. He sat with his hands in his lap for a moment. Then he turned around. Holloway had not moved. He was sitting in exactly the same position he had been in when Elijah started, and his face was doing something that a man of his particular professional discipline clearly did not intend to be visible, which made it more significant than if he had said anything. "How long has it been?" he said carefully. "Since anyone heard you play that?" "Never." Elijah looked at him. "I've never played that for anyone." The silence stretched. "All right," Holloway said. He stood up. He was working to make his voice businesslike, and not entirely succeeding. "Here is what I'm going to propose, and I want you to take your time with it. I have a slot in the spring series the third Saturday in April. It's a full concert slot, 2 hours, which is typically split between a first half and an interval and a second half. I would like you to consider filling it." Elijah stared at him. "That's 4 months." "Approximately. I haven't performed professionally in 11 years, yes, I'm aware. The Schubert alone is 42 minutes, a full concert program. You'd need 60 to 70 minutes of repertoire appropriately structured. The Schubert would anchor the second half. The first half, that's a conversation we'd have with your input and some guidance." Holloway moved toward the door, then paused. "You played 42 minutes of Schubert just now with no preparation, no warm-up, and 11 years of distance from a professional stage. You didn't miss a note. You made 6 significant interpretive decisions that I noted and would like to discuss when you're ready. This is not a charity slot, Mr. Carter. This is a programming decision based on what I heard." Elijah stood up from the bench. "I need to talk to my daughter." "Of course. And I need to talk to my mother-in-law. She helps me with Lily's schedule, and she has opinions. As she should. And I need—" He stopped. He looked at the Steinway. "I need to understand what the financial structure of this looks like. I'm not asking for charity either. The standard fee for a full concert slot in the spring series is $38,000. That's the number we offer everyone, and it's the number I'm offering you." Elijah was very still. $38,000 was 8 months of his cleaning salary. There would also be recording rights negotiations, if we go that direction, which I would like to, but that's a separate conversation. Holloway opened the rehearsal room door. "Take your time, but not too much of it. My programming assistant needs answers in 3 weeks." Elijah walked out of the building and stood on West 57th Street in the November cold, with traffic moving around him, and the city doing what the city always did, which was proceed entirely indifferent to whatever seismic thing had just happened to one person standing on one of its sidewalks. He stood there for a while. Then he called Gloria. Gloria Hughes was 67 years old and had been the gravitational center of her family since before Elijah had met her. She was Rachel's mother, which meant she was built from the same material as Rachel, that specific combination of directness and warmth that could make you feel simultaneously seen and safe, which was the rarest combination Elijah had ever encountered in another person. After Rachel died, Gloria had done what she did with everything that mattered to her. She had shown up and stayed. She lived 40 minutes away in the Bronx in the same apartment she and her husband Theodore had shared for 32 years before his death. She came on Tuesdays and Thursdays to be there when Lily got home from school. She called on Sunday mornings. She had never, not once in 11 years, made Elijah feel that her presence was anything other than a choice she was making freely and gladly. She answered on the second ring. "I've been waiting for this call," she said before he could speak. "I just left Holloway's office." And he stood on the sidewalk and told her everything. The rehearsal room, the Schubert, the spring series slot, the $38,000. Gloria said nothing through all of it. When he finished, the silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. $38,000, she said. Yes. For one night. A 2-hour concert. Another brief silence. He heard her exhale slowly. Theodore always said talent doesn't disappear. He said it goes underground, like water finding a different path. A pause. He would have been so angry at you for waiting this long. Gloria, I'm not criticizing. I'm telling you what Theodore would have said, which is different. Her voice was even factual. He would have also said that the waiting made the playing better. That the Schubert you played in that room today was not the Schubert you would have played at 27, and that the difference is worth something. He leaned against the building behind him. I'm scared. I know you are. Not of the performing. I'm scared of... He stopped working out the shape of it. I'm scared of what it means to want something for myself again. After all this time. It feels... selfish. Yes. Elijah. Her voice was gentle and completely firm at the same time. My daughter loved you because you were the best version of yourself. She did not ask you to become less than that. She did not die so that you could spend the rest of your life being less than that. He pressed the back of his head against the building and looked up at the November sky. Lily needs her father to be a whole person. She's told me herself. Gloria paused. She called me after you left this morning. She asked me to tell you something if you called me from outside the meeting because you were overthinking. She predicted I'd call you from outside the meeting. She knows you. A brief warm sound that was almost a laugh. She said to tell you the answer is yes, Dad. Just say yes. He closed his eyes. He thought about Rachel in the living room on Amsterdam Avenue, with the blanket over her legs and her eyes closed. Play me something that means something. He had played for 2 hours. He opened his eyes. Tell her I'll be home by 6, he said. And that she was right. She usually is. Gloria paused. Call Holloway. He called Holloway. Joel. 3 things happened in the weeks that followed, in an order that would later seem in retrospect to have a kind of inevitability that was only visible from the far side of it. The first was that Elijah gave notice at his cleaning job. I did this on a Wednesday morning in the office of the building manager, a man named Pat Devlin, who had managed the Ashford Grand's service staff for 19 years, and who received the news with the particular expression of a man who has watched someone underestimated finally correct the record. I figured this was coming, Devlin said. He was looking at Elijah across his desk with something that was almost paternal. After the video, I figured. I'm sorry for the short notice. Don't be sorry. Devlin leaned back in his chair. I want to ask you something, and you can tell me it's none of my business. Okay. Why'd you stay after the conservatory after everything? Why this? He gestured vaguely the desk, the uniform, the building. A man with what you have, why here? Elijah looked at him. Because it was reliable. It showed up every morning, and it paid every 2 weeks, and my daughter needed me to be something solid. And now she told me to stop being solid and start being whole. Devlin studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. 13-year-olds. He said it with the rueful wisdom of a man who had some. They see everything, don't they? They do. Devlin stood up and extended his hand. Good luck, Carter. I mean that. Elijah shook it. He meant it. The second thing that happened was that a letter arrived from the Ashford Group Foundation. He almost didn't open it. It came in a cream envelope with the foundation's letterhead embossed on the back, and for a moment he stood in the hallway of the apartment with it in his hand and considered setting it down on the kitchen table and looking at it later, because his capacity for unexpected things had been operating at its limit for 3 weeks, and he wasn't sure what else the world had queued up for him. He opened it. It was not a long letter. It was, in fact, 5 sentences handwritten in a precise and slightly angular script that he did not recognize, but that was clearly practiced the handwriting of someone who had learned to write formally and maintained the habit even in an era when no one required it. Mr. Carter. I don't know how to begin this letter correctly, so I'll simply begin it. What I said at the gala was wrong. Not the joke itself, though, that was wrong too, but the assumption behind it. The assumption that I could see a person's ceiling by looking at their floor. I am writing to let you know that the Ashford Foundation will be significantly expanding its music scholarship program, and that this decision is a direct result of what happened that evening. I don't expect anything from you. I simply wanted you to know. It was signed Vivian Ashford. He read it twice. He set it on the kitchen table. He stood there looking at it for a while. Lily came in from school at 3:45, dropped her backpack, saw the letter, saw his face, and waited. It's from Vivian Ashford, he said. Lily picked it up. She read it. Huh. She set it back down. She looked at him with Rachel's eyes, thoughtful and direct. Are you angry? No. Are you surprised? He thought about it honestly. Less than I expected to be. Why? Because I saw her face, when I walked toward her, after I played. He looked at the letter. She's not a stupid person. She saw what she did. She just needed time to sit with it. Lily considered this. That's generous of you. It's accurate. Those aren't always the same thing. He looked at her. No, they're not. He picked up the letter and folded it. This is a good thing. The scholarship expansion. Kids who need this, who are where I was at 15, at 18, they'll have something they might not have had. What are you going to do about her? Nothing right now. She didn't ask me to do anything. She asked me to know something. He put the letter in the inside pocket of his jacket. That's worth acknowledging. How do you acknowledge it? He thought about this. By doing what I'm about to do, he said. By playing the concert, by making the thing she saw in that ballroom into something real and lasting and bigger than a video that goes viral. That's how you answer a letter like that. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Mom would have liked that answer. I know. She also would have said, right back. Actually, right back. The woman wrote you a handwritten letter, Dad. He almost smiled. Go do your homework. I'm just saying. Lily. She went. But she was smiling as she went, which was the thing about her that was most purely, specifically, irreplaceably her own. Not Rachel's, not his, but hers. The third thing that happened was the phone call from the New York Times. He had expected the media interest in a general way. The video had crossed 4 million views by the end of the second week, and Marcus from the kitchen had texted him 3 times to report updates with the punctuality of a man who had decided this was now his personal responsibility. But the call from the Times was specific and slightly different in quality from the other interview requests, because the journalist who called a woman named Adrienne Park, who covered arts and culture, said something in the first 60 seconds of the conversation that made him stay on the line. I'm not calling about the gala, she said. Or not primarily. I've watched the video. I've read the comments. I've talked to 4 people who were in that room. I know what happened. What I want to understand is the 10 years before that. The conservatory, the fellowship. You didn't take the midnight practice a person to do what you did, to carry something like that in silence for that long, and keep it intact. He was quiet for a moment. Why does that matter? Because 1 million people watched a man play a piano and cried without knowing why. I think the reason they cried is because they recognized something. Not the music specifically. The cost of it. The weight of a talent maintained in silence. She paused. I think a lot of people watching that video are carrying something they've put down for the same reasons you did. A dream they shelved because life happened, and they saw you pick it back up, and it broke something open in them. He sat with that. How long have you been doing this? He asked. Covering arts and culture. Carrying something you put down. A pause on her end. A real one. 12 years, she said. I used to write fiction, before I became a journalist. What happened? Life happened. He looked at the piano against the east wall of the living room. Okay, he said. I'll do the interview. The piece ran 3 weeks before the concert. It was long, 4,000 words, which was unusual for the art section, and it started not with the gala, but with a Tuesday afternoon in Baltimore, when a 5-year-old boy picked out a melody on an upright piano with his right index finger, and his mother stopped what she was doing and came to stand in the doorway. He read it at the kitchen table, the morning it published with coffee. He didn't drink, and Lily still asleep, and found that Adrienne Park had done something precise and difficult and rare, She had written the true version of the story. Not the viral version, not the triumph narrative, but the one that contained the cost, the fellowship. Rachel, the midnight practice rooms, the 6 years of deliberate invisibility, and what it had taken out of him, and what it had unexpectedly given back. His phone started ringing 20 minutes after it went live. He sat at the kitchen table and let it ring for a while because he was not finished reading something near the end of the piece. A quote he had given her that he had forgotten, giving or rather had given without fully hearing himself give it, and that read now with a clarity that was slightly startling. She had asked him why he played the romance that night in the ballroom specifically. Not any other piece. That piece. He had said, because it's about longing. Not grief, not joy, longing. The feeling of standing at the edge of a life you could have had, and finding that you can look at it without falling apart. I've been living inside that feeling for 6 years. I needed to play it where someone could hear it. Not for them. For me. I think I needed to hear myself say, I'm still here. The music is still here. And it's still true. He read it twice. He put down the paper. He picked up his phone. I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages and 1 voicemail from a number he almost didn't recognize because it was attached to a name he associated with an entirely different chapter of his life. Dr. Gerald Marsh, room 14B. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. 30 years old now. But in his memory, still the Tuesday afternoon voice that said, the piano will wait for you. You do not have to perform, you have to arrive. He listened to the voicemail. It was 40 seconds long. The old man's voice was thinner than he remembered, slightly frail in the way voices go when the body has gotten older than the mind is comfortable with. But the precision was still there. The unhurried exact quality of someone who had said what he meant for 78 years and saw no reason to stop now. Elijah. I read the Times piece this morning. I want you to know that I told every student I had after you that there was someone who came through my room at 23 who understood what the music was actually asking of him. I never used your name. I didn't know what had happened to you, and I didn't think it was my story to tell. But I want you to know that I knew. When I read about Rachel this morning, I understood the years, and I want you to know that what you did, the choice you made, was the right one. And what you're doing now is also the right one. The piano waited for you. I always believed it would. He sat at the table for a long time after the voicemail ended. Then he did something he had not done in 11 years. He called the number back. Dr. Marsh answered on the third ring, and the sound of his voice, patient, precise, carrying the particular warmth of a man who genuinely loved his work, hit Elijah somewhere below the armor he had spent 6 years carefully constructing, and he had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. Dr. Marsh, it's Elijah Carter. I know it is. A pause that contained something warm and complicated. I'm glad you called. I'm playing the spring series, the 3rd Saturday in April. I know, I already bought a ticket. Elijah pressed his free hand flat on the kitchen table, steadying. I'm going to play the Schubert, the D960. A silence. Of course you are, the old man said. It's the only piece that tells the truth about where you've been. Another pause. I'll be in the 3rd row. I want you to know that when you walk out on that stage, whatever else is in the room, there is one person who has been waiting for this for a very long time. He could not answer that directly. I'll see you in April, he said. Yes, Dr. Marsh said. You will. The 4 months between October and April were not what Elijah had imagined they would be. He had imagined something clean. A return to a former self, like pulling a coat out of storage and finding it still fits. He had imagined that the music which had survived the years intact, which had proven itself at the Ashford Gala, which had moved a rehearsal room to silence, would simply expand to fill the new space given to it, the way water fills a container. It was not like that. The first real practice session, not the midnight fragments, not the community center hours, but a full scheduled professional practice session in the rehearsal space that Holloway had arranged for him 3 days a week, lasted 40 minutes before he stopped. Not because his hands failed him. His hands were fine. Technically, mechanically, the architecture of what he could do was exactly where he had maintained it through 6 years of 2 a.m. sessions in empty rooms. What failed him was the volume, not the piano's volume. His own. The internal volume of what it meant to play in full, without hiding, without the protective cover of darkness and solitude, and a city asleep outside the window. In the rehearsal room with the lights on, and Holloway's assistant making quiet notes in the corner, and the Steinway waiting with its full-throated presence. The music came out of him at a scale he had not allowed in years, and the scale of it frightened him in a way he had not expected and could not immediately explain. He sat with his hands on the keys and said nothing for a moment. Holloway's assistant, a young woman named Claire, who had the professional poise of someone who had witnessed many varieties of difficult in this room and was prepared for. Most of them looked up from her notepad. "Do you need water?" "No." He took his hands off the keys. "I need a minute." "Take two." He stood up and walked to the window and looked at West 57th Street and the November cold pressing against the glass. He put his forehead against the cool surface for a moment. The problem, he understood. Standing there was not the music. The problem was that the music had always been in the years since Rachel a private conversation. A dialogue between him and the grief and the love, and the accumulated weight of everything he was carrying, conducted in rooms where the conversation could not be overheard. The 2 a.m. sessions had been confessional in the truest sense, a place where he could be the full size of what he was, without frightening anyone including himself. Now he was being asked to have that conversation in public. And he didn't know yet how to be that large in front of other people, without the armor of adrenaline that the gala had provided. The gala had been involuntary. The concert would be chosen. And chosen vulnerability, he was discovering, was an entirely different animal from involuntary exposure. He turned around. "Claire." "Yes." When Holloway's musicians talked to him about what happens when the performance context changes the music. When playing for an audience does something different than playing alone. Has he addressed that? Claire considered this with the careful thoughtfulness of someone who understood that the question was more serious than it sounded. He'd be better to answer that himself. But, she paused. "He told me once that the difference between a rehearsal pianist and a concert pianist is not technical. It's the willingness to be witnessed." Elijah looked at her. "He said that what the audience does is not consume the music, it completes it. The music is always reaching toward being heard. In practice, it only gets halfway there." She looked at her notepad, then back at him. "He said the pianist who's afraid to be witnessed is playing half a piece no matter how technically perfect." Elijah stood at the window for another moment. Then he walked back to the piano. He sat down. He put his hands on the keys. And this time, when the sound came out at full volume, when it filled the room and bounced off the acoustically treated walls and arrived back at him from every direction with the undeniable presence of a thing that was real and was happening and could not be taken back. He let it. It was not comfortable, but he let it. He called Vivian Ashford 2 weeks after receiving her letter. He had thought about whether to call at all. He had thought about Lily's advice, actually write back, "The woman wrote you a handwritten letter," and had eventually concluded that a letter in return was the correct response to a letter, but that a conversation was necessary before the letter, because there were things that needed to be said that he could not write without hearing her voice first, without understanding whether the 5 sentences in the cream envelope were the whole truth or the beginning of one. She answered her own phone, which surprised him. "Mr. Carter." No pause, no surprise in her voice, as if she had been expecting the call without knowing when it would come. "Ms. Ashford." A brief silence. "I wasn't sure you'd call." "I almost didn't." He was direct about it. "I've been thinking about how to respond to your letter for 2 weeks. I kept writing versions in my head and discarding them." What was wrong with the versions? They were either too forgiving or too careful. Neither felt right. And what did right feel like? He thought about it. Like this. Like calling and saying, "I received your letter, and I believe you mean what you wrote, and I want to understand what you're going to do with what you mean." A pause. "What I'm going to do with it," she repeated. Not quite an echo, more like she was feeling the shape of the question. The scholarship expansion. You said it's happening. What does that look like specifically? She was quiet for a moment, and he had the sense of a woman who was accustomed to people asking her about outcomes rather than specifics, and who found the specificity slightly disarming. We're quadrupling the annual allocation for the Music Scholarship Fund, from 2 awards per year to 8. We're also expanding the eligibility criteria. Previously, the scholarships were merit-only, which in practice meant they went to students who already had access to quality instruction. We're adding a category specifically for students from communities where formal music education is limited or absent. Students who are teaching themselves, essentially. Students like... She stopped. Like I was, Elijah said. Yes. He let the silence sit for a moment. I also want to create an emergency grant program, she continued, for musicians who are in the position you were in, who have the talent and the training, and are one crisis away from having to choose between their music and their survival. The Elijah Carter situation. I've started calling it that internally, which I realize is presumptuous. It is somewhat. I know, I apologize. The point is, it shouldn't be a situation. It shouldn't happen that someone at your level spends 6 years cleaning floors because there's no infrastructure to catch them when life intervenes. Her voice had an edge to it now, not anger at him, something more directed inward. I've been in this world my whole life. The philanthropy world, the arts funding world. I knew this gap existed. I've known it for years. She stopped. You just weren't looking at the floors, Elijah said. Another silence. This one had a different quality. No, she said quietly. I wasn't. He stood in the kitchen of the apartment on 143rd Street with the phone against his ear and looked at the piano against the east wall. The old upright. The one that had been closed for 8 months after Rachel died, and then slowly, carefully opened again. The foundation work is good, he said. The scholarship expansion is important, and I mean that without any qualification. Those kids, the ones you're now going to reach, some of them, are going to be extraordinary. Some of them are going to make things that the world needs and wouldn't otherwise have. I know. But I want to ask you something else, something that isn't about the foundation. All right. What are you going to do differently? Not the foundation. You personally. In the way you move through rooms. In the way you look at the people at the edges of them. The silence on her end was the longest yet. He waited. I've been thinking about that, she said finally. More than the foundation, honestly. The foundation is something I know how to do. I can write checks. I can restructure programs. I can deploy capital toward problems I've identified. That's familiar territory. She paused. What you're asking is harder. You're asking whether I can change the thing that isn't a program. The assumption. The automatic, the way I assessed you in 2 seconds standing next to a piano. Yes, that's what I'm asking. I don't know, she said. And the directness of it, the absence of a polished, managed answer, was something he hadn't expected from her. I genuinely don't know. I've been trying to look at that honestly for the last 3 weeks, and what I've found is that it goes deeper than I wanted it to. The assumption isn't just about service workers or uniforms, or it's about what I've been taught to believe value looks like. And that's not something I can restructure in 3 weeks. No, he agreed. It's not. Are you angry at me? He thought about it. Honestly, the way he had tried to think about everything connected to that night without the shortcuts of easy emotion. I was briefly, the night it happened. Not during I was somewhere else entirely. But after in the loading dock before the calls started. He paused. I was angry in the way you're angry at something that's familiar. That kind of thing, what you did. I've been on the receiving end of it my whole life. Your version of it was more public and more theatrical than most, but the mechanism was the same. A pause. That's worse than I thought, she said. Yes. I'm sorry. I know you are. He moved to the kitchen table and sat down. Here's what I want you to understand. I'm not holding the gala against you. I'm genuinely not. What I did that night sitting down at that piano, I needed to do that. Maybe not in front of 300 people, maybe not as a response to a joke, but the decision I made was mine, and it was time. You didn't force me to do it. You gave me a particular kind of permission that I might not have given myself." She was quiet. "So in some way, I'm grateful isn't the right word. But I'm not sorry it happened. What I am is interested in what it means going forward. For the foundation, yes. But also for whether you're a person I can have a real conversation with. A real conversation. Not a transaction. Not a narrative where you did something wrong, and I'm the person you're trying to make it right for. An actual conversation. Between two people." Another silence. He was beginning to understand her silences. They were not evasions. They were the pauses of a woman who was genuinely thinking, rather than performing thoughtfulness. "I'd like that," she said. "I think I'd like that very much." "Then come to the concert in April. Not in the donor section. Buy a ticket." A pause. "I'll buy two," she said. "I'm bringing my goddaughter. She's 11. She's been asking me for 2 years why we never go to concerts." He almost smiled. "Good," he said. The months had their own rhythm. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday rehearsal room on West 57th. The program took shape slowly the way programs do when the musician is not just assembling repertoire, but building a statement. The Schubert anchored the second half as agreed. The first half became a conversation between Chopin and Brahms, the first ballad, which he had opened with at the gala, and then the Brahms intermezzo in a major op. 118, which was quieter and more interior, and required the audience to lean in rather than be swept up. Holloway came to every Tuesday session and sat in his chair by the door and said very little during the playing. Afterward, they would talk not about notes or technique, which needed no discussion, but about interpretation, about what each passage was doing, about whether the musical argument being constructed across 2 hours held together internally. "You're playing the intermezzo like an apology," Holloway said one Tuesday afternoon. Elijah lifted his hands from the keys. "What do you mean?" "You're keeping it small, undervoiced, like you're afraid of imposing on the listener. The intermezzo is an intimate piece. It's an intimate piece that trusts the listener to meet it. There's a difference between intimacy and apology." Holloway uncrossed his legs. "Play it like you're confiding in someone, not like you're apologizing to them." Elijah turned back to the piano. He played the opening again. Holloway said nothing. He played it again differently, not louder, but with more weight behind the softness, the kind of quiet that has full presence behind it rather than retreat. "There," Holloway said. "That's it. The difference is almost imperceptible. The difference is everything. The audience will feel it even if they can't name it. They'll feel the difference between a man who's asking permission and a man who's arrived." Elijah sat with that. "You've been asking permission for a long time," Holloway said. "Not unkindly. Permission to take up space. Permission to be what you are in full. The concert is you learning to stop asking." It was one of the most uncomfortable true things anyone had said to him in years. He played the intermezzo again. Lily came to the first full run-through in February. She sat in the third row of the rehearsal hall. Holloway had booked a larger space for the run-through with proper acoustics and 60 folding chairs for an audience of staff and invited guests. And she brought her violin case with her, the way she always did, tucked it under her chair, and sat with her hands in her lap and her back straight. Gloria sat beside her. Marcus from the Ashford Grand Kitchen was in the 5th row. Elijah had told him the date without thinking of it as an invitation, and Marcus had shown up anyway, which was exactly the kind of person Marcus was. Dr. Marsh was in the 3rd row 2 seats from Lily, and he had nodded at Elijah when he walked out. One small complete nod that contained 30 years. Elijah stood at the side of the stage. How was wearing the clothes he would wear to the concert, a simple dark suit, no tie. He had debated the tie with Lily for 15 minutes 2 evenings ago. "Ties are formal," she had said. "This is a formal concert. Ties are formal in a way that puts distance between you and the audience. You don't want distance." "How do you know what I want?" "Dad." She had given him the look. "No tie." No tie. He stood at the side of the stage and looked at the 60 people in the chair's staff he barely knew. Knew a few journalists. Holloway had invited his people in the 3rd row, and felt the specific familiar unwelcome tremor in his chest that was not quite fear and not quite excitement, and was in fact the precise physical sensation of standing at the boundary between the life he had been living and the one he was about to step into. He thought about Rachel. He thought about the living room on Amsterdam Avenue, and the couch, and the blanket over her legs, and the 2 hours of Chopin. Play me something that means something. He walked out onto the stage. He sat at the piano. He adjusted the bench. He put his hands in his lap, and then he played the full 2 hours with the interval with the program as designed. The Chopin ballad, first opening. The way he had opened at the gala, but slower now, more deliberate, a man who had practiced the vulnerability rather than stumbling into it. Then the Brahms, the intermezzo, with its full quiet presence, confiding rather than apologizing. The interval. And then the Schubert 42 minutes of D. 960, the piece he had learned to understand grief with the piece he had played in Holloway's rehearsal room and never played for anyone before. He played it like the first time. He played it as if he were still alone. And the 60 people in those chairs, the staff members who had come as a professional courtesy and sat down with their phones not quite put away, and their attention only half committed, sat up. One by one, over the first 10 minutes, they put their phones away. They sat up. They stopped being polite and started being present. He heard it happening. The quality of the silence, changing, deepening, taking on the texture of genuine attention rather than performed attention. He had forgotten how that felt from the inside. How you could sense an audience arriving one person at a time until the whole room was somewhere together. When he finished the Schubert, the last note sustaining and then fading to nothing, the room was completely still, for he counted 6 seconds. Then it came. He stood and turned. Lily was on her feet. She was the first one standing, which did not surprise him. Her face was doing something complicated, the specific expression of someone who has been holding something in for a long time and has just discovered they can put it down. There were tears on her face. She wasn't trying to stop them. She was clapping and crying and looking at him with her mother's eyes wide open, and he stood at the edge of the stage and looked back at her, and for a moment it was just the two of them in the room, the way it had been in some fundamental sense for the last 6 years. Gloria's hand was over her mouth. Marcus was standing too, clapping with the focused enthusiasm of a man who has been waiting a long time to do this. And in the third row, 2 seats from Lily, Dr. Gerald Marsh was seated, the only person in the room still seated, and he was not clapping. He was simply looking at Elijah with the expression of someone who has just witnessed the completion of something they have been carrying for a very long time, and he gave a single small nod. The same nod as before, but different now. Elijah nodded back. After the run-through in the hallway outside the rehearsal hall, Lily found him before anyone else could. She walked up to him and put both arms around him and pressed her face against his shoulder, and he held on to her with the particular ferocity of a father who has spent 6 years making sure she was okay and has just for the first time allowed himself to be held up in return. "Don't say anything," he said into the top of her head. "Just give me a second." She stayed still. They stood there in the hallway for a moment that had no particular length, a moment that was outside time in the specific way that moments become when they contain too much to be measured. Then she pulled back and looked up at him. Her face was still streaked. She didn't care. "The Schubert," she said. "Dad, the Schubert." "I know. I've never heard anything like it." "You've heard me play 100 times. Not like that." She shook her head. "Not like that. That was you, all of you, the whole thing." She pressed her hand flat against his chest for a moment, a gesture so like her mother's that he had to look away briefly. "Mom would have—" "I know," he said. "I know, baby." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, collected herself with the speed of someone who has long practice at it. "Dr. Marsh is waiting to talk to you, and Marcus wants to take a photo, and there's a journalist who keeps hovering near the door. In a minute. Holloway looks—" She paused. "He looks like he's trying not to show how happy he is. He's a professional. He's failing at it." Elijah almost laughed. He took a breath. He looked at his daughter, 13 years old. Rachel's eyes, his hands entirely her own person, and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for a very long time. Lily. Yeah. Thank you. She looked at him steadily. For what? For not letting me keep waiting. She considered this for a moment with the seriousness it deserved. Don't thank me, she said finally. Thank Mom. She's the one who taught me not to put down something worth carrying. He looked at her. Go talk to Dr. Marsh, she said. He's been waiting 30 years. You owe him at least 5 minutes. She walked back into the room. He stood in the hallway for another moment. Then he followed her. Dr. Marsh's 5 minutes became 40. They sat in the empty front row after everyone else had drifted out to the lobby. Elijah still in his concert suit, and the old man in the deliberate, precise clothes of someone who had dressed for the occasion, and they talked the way they had talked in room 14B 30 years ago. Not small talk, not pleasantry, but the specific conversation of two people for whom music was not a subject, but a shared language. The tempo in the Schubert's third movement, Marsh said. You're pushing it slightly, not enough to be a flaw, but enough that I noticed. I know. I've been going back and forth on it. What's the argument for pushing? Momentum. The third movement can become static if you're too faithful to the marking. The listener needs to feel it moving toward something. And the argument against? The movement doesn't want momentum. It wants weight. It wants you to stay inside each measure long enough for it to mean something. He looked at the piano. I keep making the same mistake. I want to pull the listener forward, and Schubert wants them to stand still. Marsh was quiet for a moment. Rachel, he said. Elijah looked at him. In your movement you mentioned her. In the way you spoke about the piece during our call. Marsh turned to look at him directly. She's in the third movement. That's why you keep pushing. Because staying too long inside it cost you something. The rehearsal hall was very quiet. Yes, Elijah said. Stop pushing. Dr. Marsh, the audience needs to stay in it too, and they can only stay in it if you stay in it. The old man looked at him with the patient precision of someone who has given this particular advice before, in different forms to different students, and who knows, it is the kind of advice that can only be heard when a person is ready to hear it. She's not gone from the music, Elijah. She's in it. That's different. The music carries her. You don't have to. Elijah looked at the stage, at the piano waiting. He pressed his hands together in his lap and held them there. Okay, he said. Okay. Stop pushing. I hear you. Marsh nodded. The small, precise nod. Play it Tuesday as written. See what it does. I will. The old man started to stand slowly with the considered movement of his years, and Elijah stood with him. I want to say something, Marsh said. He turned to look at Elijah fully the way he had in room 14B on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. What you chose when Rachel became ill. I want you to know that I understand it differently now than I did at the time. Elijah waited. At the time when you withdrew, I won't pretend I wasn't disappointed. The fellowship, the trajectory you were on. I thought what a cost. What an enormous cost. He paused. I was thinking about the music, what it was losing. He met Elijah's eyes. I wasn't thinking about what the music was gaining, what it was holding for you all those years, what it would become in those practice rooms at 2 a.m. alone when there was nothing left to perform for. Elijah said nothing. What I heard today, the Schubert especially, is not the Schubert of a 27-year-old prodigy. It is not technically superior, though it is technically extraordinary. It is emotionally of a different order entirely. The piece holds something that only a specific kind of living could put in it. The old man looked at the piano. I was wrong to think it was only a loss. It was also, if I can say this without making it seem like grief is a curriculum. I understand what you mean. It was also instruction. He paused. The most important instruction. The kind no conservatory can give. They stood together in the empty hall for a moment. In April, Marsh said. When you walk out onto that stage, I want you to know something. What you're bringing out there is not just talent. It is not just training. It is 11 years of choosing every single day to stay intact. to maintain something worth maintaining in the dark alone, without any guarantee that anyone would ever hear it. He put a hand briefly on Elijah's arm. "That is the most extraordinary thing I have witnessed in 50 years of this work." Elijah looked at the stage, at the piano waiting. And for the first time since October, since the gala, since the loading dock, since the 1 million views morning in Holloway's rehearsal room, and the letter in the cream envelope, and the phone call with Gloria, and Lily's hand pressed flat against his chest in the hallway. For the first time, the thing that had been trembling in him, that low, unsteady frequency of a man standing at the edge of a decision, went quiet. Not gone, not resolved into certainty or comfort, but quiet. The way the piano was quiet before the first note. The way a room is quiet when it has finished filling up and is ready to receive something. He was ready. April was 6 weeks away, and the piano was waiting. The third Saturday in April arrived, the way important days always do, without ceremony, without the sky looking any different, without the city pausing even briefly to acknowledge that something was about to happen inside one of its concert halls, that a specific collection of people had been moving toward for months, and in some cases for decades. Elijah woke at 6. He lay in the dark for a few minutes, without reaching for his phone, without checking anything, just lying in the quiet of the apartment on 143rd Street, with the radiator making its familiar tapping sound, and the early light coming in at the edges of the curtain, and he took inventory of himself the way he had learned to do in the months of preparation, not anxiously, but honestly. Checking what was present, and what was steady, and what needed attention. His hands were calm. His chest was not exactly, but it was a familiar, not calm. By now the frequency he had learned to identify as readiness, rather than fear. The specific internal weather of a man standing at the near edge of something large. He got up. I went to the kitchen. He made coffee. He stood at the counter drinking it and looking at the upright piano against the east wall. The old one. The one that had been closed for 8 months, and then slowly, painstakingly reopened, the one that had held all the years of 2 a.m. sessions and midnight fragments and the particular private music of a man maintaining something in the dark. He walked to it. He sat down. He lifted the fallboard. He played one thing, not a concert piece, not a passage from the program. He played the melody his mother had heard him pick out with one finger when he was 5 years old in Baltimore, in the house on Fulton Avenue. The melody that had started everything. He didn't remember where he had learned it. It was just in him, the way some things are simply in a person from the beginning, waiting to be found. He played it once through quietly with both hands now. Then he closed the fallboard. I went to make his daughter breakfast. Lily came to the kitchen in her school clothes. She had school until noon, a half day she had negotiated with focused determination, and then Gloria would bring her to the hall by 2 for the sound check, and she sat across from him at the table and ate the eggs he had made, and looked at him with the measured attention of someone conducting a quiet assessment. "You slept," she said. Not a question. "Some." "How are your hands?" "Fine." "How's your head?" He looked at her. "When did you start conducting intake evaluations?" "When you started needing them." She ate. "Dr. Marsh texted me last night." He raised an eyebrow. "He has my number now. We've been texting." She said it with complete calm. "He wanted to make sure someone was checking on you this morning." "He texted my 13-year-old daughter to check on me." He texted your 13-year-old daughter, who he described as, and I quote, "the most sensible person in your immediate circle." Elijah looked at the ceiling. "He's not wrong," Lily said. "Eat your eggs." She ate. Then, Marcus called last night too. He wanted to know if he should bring anything. I told him just himself. He said he'd ironed his good shirt. Something moved through Elijah's chest, at that something warm and specific, and without a clean name, the feeling of being held by people who had chosen to hold you, which was different from family obligation or professional investment, and was simply purely love in one of its most uncomplicated forms. "Gloria's picking you up at 1:30. 1:15. She said 1:30, but she'll be early. She's been ironing her dress since yesterday." He looked at his daughter across the breakfast table. This person who had her mother's eyes and his hands, and was entirely her own thing, who had grown up watching him come home at midnight, smelling like cleaning solution, and had never once asked him to be less than what he was, who had said, "I told you," in a loading dock hallway, with 4 million strangers watching, and meant it with her whole self. Lily. Yeah. I need to say something. She put down her fork. She gave him her full attention, the way she always did when she understood that something mattered. Everything I've done for the last 6 years, every shift, every midnight session, every choice I made about what to keep and what to set aside, I made it for you. You know that. I know. But I need you to know something else. Tonight isn't for you. He held her eyes. Tonight is for me. For the first time in a long time, this specific thing is mine. And I needed to say that out loud to someone before I walk onto that stage. Lily was quiet for a moment. Her expression was not hurt. It was something more careful than that, the expression of a young person receiving a complicated truth and handling it with more grace than most adults manage. I know that too, she said finally. And I think that's the most important thing you've said to me in a long time. She picked her fork back up. You're allowed to have things that are yours, Dad. You've always been allowed. I'm just learning that. I know. She met his eyes briefly. I'll be in the front row. I know you will. Front row center. You won't be able to miss me. I never can. She almost smiled. She looked back at her eggs. Mom will be there too, she said. Quietly, matter-of-factly, the way she said things that she had thought about for a long time and had decided were simply true. Not like I don't mean it strangely. I just mean she'll be in the music, the way she always is when you play. He looked at his hands. Yeah, he said. She will. The hall held 1,200 seats. By the time Elijah stood in the wing at 7:55 p.m., every one of them was filled. He knew this because Claire had told him, and because he could hear it, the particular unmistakable sound of a full house in the minutes before a performance, that specific compound of 1,200 individual conversations and movements and anticipations that produces a collective sound unlike any other. A sound that has weight and texture, and a kind of living warmth that an empty hall never has, regardless of how perfect its acoustics. He stood in the wing and did not look at the house. He looked at the stage. The Steinway Concert Grand sat in the center of it, a Model D, the same model as the one at the Ashford Gala. Though this one had been tuned that afternoon and prepared by a technician whose work Elijah had reviewed and found excellent. The bench was set. The single lamp at the piano cast its particular circle of light. The rest of the stage was dim. He was alone in the wing. Holloway had said everything he needed to say in the afternoon. They had sat in the green room at 4 o'clock with coffee. They barely touched, and Holloway had looked at him for a long moment and said only, "You're ready. You've been ready. Go out there and stop proving it and just do it." Then he had shaken Elijah's hand and left to deal with the 100 logistical details that were his domain and not Elijah's. That was the right conversation to have had. Now there was nothing left to say to anyone. He thought about Rachel. Not the ending he had made a practice over 11 years of not letting his mind go immediately to the ending when he thought about her. He went to the living room on Amsterdam Avenue. The couch. The blanket over her legs. The way she held very still when he played, as if movement would disturb something fragile and worth protecting. The 2 hours of Chopin on that November night. Play me something that means something. He had played for 2 hours. Tonight he would play for 2 hours again. He heard his name announced. He walked out. 1,200 people saw him walk from the wing to the piano. He did not look at the house. He walked with the particular pace of a man who has decided that the distance between the wing and the piano bench is not a performance, but a transition, a crossing from one state to another, and who is conducting that crossing with full and quiet attention. He sat. He adjusted the bench. He put his hands in his lap. He looked at the keys for a moment. Then he lifted his eyes just briefly, just once, to the front row. Lily was in the center seat. She was wearing the blue dress she had bought with Gloria 3 weeks ago, and her violin case was not with her. For once her hands were in her lap, and she was looking at him with an expression that was not anticipation and not nervousness, and was simply presence. She was simply there, fully, completely without reservation. 2 seats to her right. Gloria had her hands folded and her back straight, and the expression of a woman who has been waiting for something for a long time and has not allowed herself to fully believe it would arrive until this moment. In the 3rd row, slightly off-center, Dr. Marsh sat in his precise, deliberate way, and he gave the nod. Elijah nodded back. He placed his hands on the keys. He played. The Chopin ballad opened the way it had opened in the ballroom of the Ashford Grand 6 months ago, those first questioning measures. The door pushed open in a dark house, but it was not the same. The ballroom performance had been involuntary, adrenaline-driven, the music of a man who had suddenly stopped hiding. This was the music of a man who had spent 6 months learning to stand in the full light of what he was, and the difference was audible in every measure. He played the opening with the patience of someone who knows exactly where he is going and has decided that the arrival is worth making the listener wait for. Not slowly, the tempo was correct, but deeply. Each note given its full weight. Nothing rushed toward the next moment at the expense of this one. The house was still within 90 seconds. Not the polite stillness of an audience observing a social contract. The real stillness, the involuntary kind. The kind that happens to 1,200 people simultaneously when something gets past the outer layer of their attention and lands somewhere they didn't know they'd left open. He felt it. He had learned in those months of preparation to feel it without reacting to it, to let the audience's attention arrive and receive it, without adjusting to it, without performing for it, without letting the awareness of being witnessed change the nature of what was being said. The piano waited for him. He did not have to perform. He had to arrive. He arrived. In the 7th row, slightly left of center, Vivian Ashford sat with her goddaughter Cora beside her. Cora was 11 small for her age, with the focused intensity of a child who takes everything seriously and makes no apology for it. She had been asking Vivian about concerts for 2 years. When Vivian had called her 3 months ago and said they were going to see a pianist in April, Cora had asked 3 questions in immediate succession. Who is he? What will he play? And can we sit close? They were sitting in the 7th row. Cora had been still since the first note. Vivian watched her goddaughter more than she watched the stage for the first few minutes. Watched the child's face, doing the thing that children's faces do when they encounter something that goes directly in, without the filtering mechanisms that adults spend their whole lives building. Pure reception. No mediation. Then the Chopin pulled her back. She had listened to recordings of it in the weeks before the concert, not to prepare, not to have opinions, but because she had found herself wanting to understand the thing she had tried to reduce to a joke in a ballroom, and had discovered she could not understand it from a distance. It required proximity. Proximity was different. In the 7th row, with 1,200 people around her, and the sound arriving not through speakers, but through air, direct and physical. She understood for the first time what the room at the gala had understood, and she had been too defended to fully receive. The music was not impressive. It was true. That was the distinction she had been missing. Impressive was something she was surrounded by every day. Impressive was the currency of her world, and she had learned long ago to receive it with appropriate appreciation and feel nothing in particular. Truth was different. Truth arrived without asking permission and did not wait to be evaluated. She sat in the 7th row and listened to Elijah Carter play, and felt for the second time in 6 months the precise and disorienting sensation of something getting past all her defenses and doing something directly to her. She did not try to stop it this time. She sat with it. When the interval came and the lights rose slightly, Cora turned to her immediately. Vivian. I know. That's Vivian. Who is he? His name is Elijah Carter. How do you know him? Vivian was quiet for a moment. I made a mistake once, she said, in front of a lot of people, and he handled it better than I deserved. She paused. And then he did this. Cora looked at the stage, at the empty bench, the waiting piano. I want to play like that, she said, not wistfully, with the particular declaration of a child who has just identified something they intend to pursue. You play piano. I've been asking Mom for lessons for a year. Vivian looked at her goddaughter. "We'll get you lessons," she said. "You always say we'll see." "I'm saying we'll get you lessons." She held Cora's eyes. "I mean it this time." Cora studied her for a moment with the unsettling perceptiveness of 11 years old. "Something changed in you," she said. Vivian looked at the stage. "Yes," she said. "Something did." The second half opened with the Schubert. Elijah walked back out to a house that had been transformed by the interval into something more than it had been before, an audience that had spent 20 minutes processing what they'd heard, and was now sitting down again with the specific hunger of people who have been given something real and want more of it. He sat. He adjusted the bench. He did not look at the front row this time. He looked at the keys. He heard Dr. Marsh's voice in his memory from the conversation in the empty rehearsal hall. "Stop pushing. The music carries her. You don't have to." He thought about the third movement, the one that had cost him something every time he played it. The one where he had been pushing the tempo because staying inside it too long meant staying inside the thing he had carried for 11 years, and he had learned to carry it by keeping it at a managed distance. Not tonight. Tonight, he was going to stop managing the distance. He placed his hands on the keys. He played the Schubert the way it needed to be played. All 42 minutes of it. He played the first movement with its long, searching questions. Questions that don't demand answers, but need to be asked anyway. The way grief needs to be named, even when naming it, changes nothing. He played the second movement with the full aching weight of something that is beautiful, because it is also passing, and knows it is passing, and does not pretend otherwise. He played the third movement without pushing. He stayed inside it, every measure, every suspension, every moment, where the music wanted him to stand still, and he had always moved through instead. He stood still. And Rachel was there. Not in any mystical sense, he was not a man who dealt in mystical things. She was there the way she was always there, in the music, in the choices he had made about what the notes meant, in the interpretation that had been shaped by 11 years of living the specific life he had lived, in the knowledge of what love costs and what it gives back, and how those two things are not in opposition, but are simply the same thing from different angles. She was in the music, and the music held her, and he did not have to. When he reached the fourth movement, the finale, which in D960 is not triumphant, but is simply quietly resolved, he played it with the specific feeling of a man who has set down something very heavy and found that his arms still work, that he is still standing, that the ground beneath him is solid. He played the last chord. He held the sustain pedal. The note hung in the air of the hall for 3 seconds, and then it was gone. The silence lasted 8 seconds. He counted them. He had his hands in his lap and his eyes on the fallboard of the piano, and he counted 8 full seconds of absolute, complete held silence from 1,200 people. Then the house came apart. It was not applause in the conventional sense, or it was technically, but it had the quality of something that was happening to people, rather than something they were choosing to do. The sound was immediate and total from every part of the hall simultaneously. And underneath it, he could hear voices, not words, just the particular vocalization of people in the grip of something they don't have a prepared response for. He stood. He turned. Lily was on her feet. She was the first one standing again, and she was not crying this time. She was looking at him with both hands pressed together in front of her face, not quite praying, just containing something, and her expression was not the complicated grief and joy mixture of the run-through. It was something cleaner and more complete. It was pride. Not the pride of a child watching a parent succeed. The pride of a person who has seen someone they love become fully what they always were. Gloria was standing beside her with tears running freely down her face, making no effort to stop them clapping with the steady rhythm of a woman who has been waiting for this moment long enough that she is going to give it everything she has. Marcus, fifth row, was on his feet with his ironed shirt and his broad hands, making a noise disproportionate to one person, and his face was doing something it probably didn't do. Often something open and unconstrained and completely happy. Dr. Marsh was standing. The old man was on his feet. He was standing with the careful, deliberate effort of someone for whom standing requires intention, and he was not clapping. He was simply standing upright and still looking at Elijah with the expression of a man who has just watched something conclude in exactly the way it should have. Elijah looked at him. The old man placed his right hand briefly over his heart. Elijah's throat closed. He pressed his hand to his own chest. They held that for a moment, across the rows of standing applauding people across 30 years, and a fellowship and a hospital, and 6 years of midnight practice, and a ballroom in October, and a rehearsal room, and 42 minutes of Schubert in April, across all of it, that gesture, simple and complete. Then Elijah turned back to the full house. 1,200 people on their feet. He stood at the edge of the stage in the circle of light from the piano lamp, and he took it in, not with triumph, not with the vindication of a man who has been proven right, but with the quiet, specific gratitude of someone who has been given back something he thought he had forfeited permanently, and knows the giving back required other people's courage as much as his own. He bowed. Afterward in the green room, the world arrived. It arrived in the form of David Holloway, standing in the doorway, with his professional composure, completely abandoned, saying simply, "That was the finest Schubert I have heard in this hall in 20 years." It arrived in the form of journalists and music executives, and the director of a symphony orchestra in Chicago, who had driven from the airport directly to the concert, and who introduced himself with the focused urgency of a man on a deadline. It arrived in the form of the recording engineer, who had been positioned in the hall that night, and who was already on his phone with the label. Elijah stood in the center of it, and shook hands, and said the appropriate things, and was present for all of it, because it was real, and it mattered, and he was not going to diminish it by pretending it didn't. But he was watching the door. Lily came through it first, which was correct. She came straight to him through the room full of people, and he opened his arms, and she walked into them, and he held her, and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying that the holding didn't already say. Gloria came next. She put both hands on his face and looked at him, and her eyes were still wet, and she said in a voice that was very steady and very clear. Theodore would have been insufferable about this. He would have told everyone he knew. I know. He would have called strangers. I know, Gloria. He loved you like a son. She held his face for a moment. She loved you like there isn't a word. I know. Good. She released him. She straightened. She became composed again with the speed of a woman who has learned to carry large things lightly. Now go talk to those music people. They've been waiting patiently, and they look like they might vibrate out of their shoes. Marcus appeared at his elbow, with the specific timing of a man who has been waiting for the family moment to conclude before inserting himself appropriately. Good shirt, Elijah said. I told you I ironed it. Marcus extended his hand, and Elijah took it, and Marcus covered it with his other hand, and held on for a moment. I always wondered, and now I know. He shook his head slowly. Carter, man. Go get some of the food. They always have good food at these things. Already did. He grinned. Twice. Dr. Marsh came through the door, last moving carefully through the crowded room, and the crowd seemed to sense his significance without knowing the specific shape of it, and made way for him without being asked. He stopped in front of Elijah. They looked at each other. The third movement, Marsh said. I stopped pushing. I know, I heard. He was quiet for a moment. How did it feel? Elijah thought about it honestly. Like putting something down, he said. And finding out I didn't need to carry it anymore, because the music was carrying it. The old man nodded. That's the lesson, he said. That's the one that takes the longest. He paused. You were 23 years old in room 14B, and I saw someone who understood music technically at a level that took most students 10 more years to reach. What I could not have given you then, what no teaching can give, is what you walked out on that stage with tonight. He met Elijah's eyes. You're ready now. Not the way gifted students are ready. The way a complete musician is ready. There's a difference. Tonight the room understood it. I hope you do too. Elijah looked at him. I'm starting to, he said. Vivian Ashford found him 40 minutes later, when the green room had thinned, and the conversations had become less urgent, and the night had settled into something quieter. She was with Cora, who held back slightly, with the social awareness of a child who understands that some moments are not hers, while Vivian came to where Elijah was standing near the window. They looked at each other. 6 months of distance between the gala and this room, and in that distance, a letter in a cream envelope, a phone call about what it means to actually change, rather than to restructure a scholarship expansion, a foundation recalibrated, and something in both of them that had shifted, not resolved, not completed, but shifted in the direction of something more honest. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure you meant the invitation." "I meant it." She was quiet for a moment. She looked different than she had at the gala, not in anything obvious, not in clothes or composure. Something behind the composure. Something slightly less managed. As if the layer of practiced presentation had been reduced by one, and what was underneath was someone more ordinary and more real. "The Schubert," she said. "I want to ask you something about it, and I want you to know I'm not asking as small talk." "Ask." In the third movement, there was a point where the music changed. Not in tempo, not technically, something else. Something in the room changed. She paused. "What happened?" He looked at the window, the city outside the lights. "I stopped protecting myself from it," he said. "There's a part of the third movement that costs me something. Has cost me something every time I've played it for 6 years. Tonight I stopped trying to get through it and just stayed in it." "What's in it?" "My wife." Vivian was quiet. "She's in all of it," Elijah continued. "She always has been. But the third movement it's the part where the piece acknowledges that what it loves is not permanent. That the thing it's most grateful for is also the thing it's losing. I used to rush through it because staying inside that it's expensive." He looked at Vivian. "Tonight I stopped rushing. And it turns out that the music holds it better than I do. I don't have to carry it. It's already in there. I just have to play it." Vivian looked at him with the expression of a woman who has understood something she was not expecting to understand tonight. "That's what I felt change," she said. "In the 7th row. That's what I felt." "Yes." A pause. "I owe you an apology that I haven't found the right shape for yet," she said. "The letter was a beginning. The foundation changes are real. But there's something more direct that I haven't said to your face." "Vivian, let me say it." She held his eyes. "I looked at you in 2 seconds and decided what you were. I used a room full of people to make sure you understood what I had decided. And I was wrong in a way that goes beyond the specific incident. I was wrong about what value looks like, what talent looks like, what a person is allowed to be, regardless of what they're wearing or where they're standing." She paused. "I'm sorry. Not for the incident. For the thinking behind it. That's what I should have said in the letter and didn't know how to." He looked at her for a long moment. "I accept that," he said. "And I want to say something in return." She waited. "What you're building with the foundation, the 8 scholarships, the emergency grants, the expansion into communities where formal training doesn't reach, that matters more than the apology. The apology is between you and me. The foundation is for the people who never get a ballroom moment, who never have a gala to walk into and a piano to sit down at, who carry the same thing I carried and never get a Holloway calling them from the back of the room." He held her eyes. "That's the work. The apology is just the door. Make sure you walk through it." She absorbed this. "I will," she said. Not the managed certainty of a press release. The quieter certainty of a promise. "Good." They stood in the green room for a moment, in the particular piece of 2 people who have navigated something difficult and arrived somewhere more honest than where they started. Then Cora appeared at Vivian's elbow, patient and present. "This is Cora," Vivian said. "She wants to take piano lessons. Starting Monday," Cora said, with the decisive air of someone who has already settled this internally. Elijah looked at her focused, serious face, at the particular light in her eyes that he recognized that he had seen in photographs of himself at that age, and in Lily at 4 years old, picking out melodies, and in a practice room doorway on a Wednesday night 30 years ago. The light of someone who has just heard something that confirmed what they already suspected about the world, that it contains more than it appears to, that the thing they feel inside themselves, when they are most themselves, is real, and that there are people who have lived inside it and survived and have something to say. "Play everything," he said to her. "Don't rush through the hard parts. The hard parts are where the music lives." Cora looked at him very seriously. "Okay," she said. "I will." At 11:30. When everyone had gone, and the green room was quiet, Elijah sat alone for a few minutes. Lily had gone with Gloria's school in the morning, non-negotiable, a condition she had agreed to with minimal protest. But at the door, she had turned back and looked at him across the emptying room and said the thing she had said in the apartment kitchen on the morning of the gala 6 months ago that had started all of this. "I told you." He had looked at her. "I told you you belonged on a stage." "You did. And you were right." She had smiled, not the measured, contained smile of a 13-year-old managing her emotions, but the real one, the one that was entirely hers, bright and complete and uncomplicated. "Go home," he had said. "I'll be there by midnight." Now he sat in the empty green room and held the quiet for a while. He thought about the 5-year-old in Baltimore, with one finger finding a melody on a piano. I thought about room 14B and Dr. Marsh's Tuesday-Thursday voice, and the particular quality of light in a practice room at 11 p.m. He thought about Rachel in the doorway of that same practice room you play, like you're arguing with someone, and everything that followed from that moment. The wedding, the diagnosis, the choices, the hospital, the promise made at the side of a bed. "I will give Lily the life you dreamed for her." I thought about 6 years of midnights. The community center on Amsterdam Avenue. The fall board closed for 8 months and then slowly, painstakingly opened again. The specific, stubborn private work of maintaining something in the dark without knowing whether anyone would ever hear it. He thought about a squeaky cartwheel in the Ashford Grand Ballroom. About a joke mad with a microphone. About cleaning gloves placed on a metal cart and a velvet rope unhooked and a bench adjusted by 3 inches. He thought about Lily's face in the front row tonight, both hands pressed together, not crying, just there. Just fully, completely, permanently there. He stood up. He put on his jacket. He turned off the green room light. He walked down the corridor of the concert hall, past the photographs of the musicians who had played here before him, past the playbills and the programs, and the history of 100 years of people who had walked this same corridor with their hands full of music and their hearts full of everything that music had cost them, and he pushed open the stage door and walked out into the April night. The city received him the way it always did, without ceremony, without pause, the way cities receive everyone equally and judge no one, the way the night contains whatever a person brings into it. He stood on the sidewalk. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked up at the sky. The city sky, never fully dark, always slightly luminous, with the ambient light of 10 million lives running simultaneously. And he held the moment for exactly as long as it needed to be held. Then he started walking. Not home yet, just walking. The way he had walked for 6 years through this city with his head down and his cart squeaking, and his hands in gloves, and his music sealed inside him like something in a vault that only he had the combination to, except that now the vault was open and the music was out, and it was in 1,200 people who would go home tonight and try to describe what they had heard to someone who hadn't been there, and find that they couldn't quite, because the thing the music had done to them was not describable, only receivable. It was in Lily front row center, hands pressed together. It was in Gloria, who would call her sister in Atlanta tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. and talk for an hour about a promise kept. It was in Marcus with his ironed shirt, who would go back to the Ashford Grand on Monday and tell everyone on the service staff what he had witnessed. It was in Dr. Marsh, who would sit in room 14B one more time before the semester ended and think about a Tuesday afternoon 30 years ago, and the student who had understood something about music that most students never do, who had gone away and lived inside it instead of performing it, and had come back with the proof of what living inside it actually costs and actually gives. It was in Cora, 11 years old, who would start piano lessons on Monday with the focused intention of a person who has heard something that confirmed what they always suspected, and who would spend the next decade in practice rooms of her own, finding out what it means to argue with the music, and then stop arguing and just let it speak. It was in Vivian Ashford, who would wake up tomorrow morning and sit at her desk and look at the foundation portfolio and see it differently than she had every other morning. See it not as a managed distance from the problem, but as an actual bridge into it, and who would spend the next year rebuilding it from that understanding outward, one scholarship, one grant, one phone call at a time. And it was in the 11 minutes at the Ashford Gala that had started all of this, the squeaky wheel, and the velvet rope, and the cleaning gloves on the metal cart, and 300 people discovering simultaneously that they had been looking at the edges of a room and missing the thing it contained. Elijah Carter walked through the April night with his hands in his pockets and the music still moving in him, not performing, not containing, not maintaining in the dark, but simply present the way. It had always been present the way it would always be present, because some things do not leave a person, no matter what the person sets aside, or picks back up, or carries, or puts down. Some things are simply in you from the beginning, and all they need in the end is one moment when someone stops hiding them long enough for the world to hear. He walked home. The piano was waiting. It always had been.